Hello, hi. Thank you for joining us. I'm Isla Telford, one of 3 co-directors of Urban Wilderness, alongside Laurel Gallagher and Jenny Harper. We are a community interest company based in Stoke-on-Trent. Just for a small bit of background about our organisation, we set up in 2018 to run youth-led festivals in overlooked green spaces in Stoke-on-Trent. Obviously, due to the pandemic, we've had a slight change in direction. But thank you all very much for joining us here today. We're going to spend a couple of hours talking about public art. We're going to use the hashtags, #PublicArtNow, and if you want to if you're using Twitter, please tag us at urban_CIC. We're obviously not at home. We are in the brilliant King Street studios, so thank you very much to Pete Herbert and his team for their incredible technical and production support. And we are really looking forward to today's programme of artists. We've got a range of artists sharing their work and experience of working in public spaces. We're equally delighted to be joined by all of you. We've got a pretty dazzling list of delegates, all of who've got a wealth of experience and inspiration, artists, academics and community change makers, many people from our local area in Stoke-on-Trent, but also many people from much wider. So thank you for joining us and welcome. This event is being recorded and the recording of it will be shared online as a learning resource afterwards. So if you don't want to be recorded, then you've got the option to switch your camera off during the discussion rooms, during the breakout rooms. So I'm going to quickly run through what to expect for the next 2 hours and then I'll pass you over to Laurel. During the first hour, we will all be in this same virtual space and we will hear from 3 brilliant speakers about their work in public spaces. Anna Berry is an artist from Milton Keynes who creates installations in public spaces. Ellie Harris is the executive producer of Greenwich and Docklands International Festival, and she'll be speaking about programming hyperlocal during 2020. And Gabriella Gay is a Stoke-on-Trent-based cultural producer and page stage poet, and she'll be talking about her experiences in creating community through art for taking up space during 2020. We'll then move to a 15-minute break and we'll play 2 short films. At 12:15, we'll come back together and you'll be invited to join your breakout rooms. If you've expressed an interest in which breakout room to join, that's the one you'll be allocated to. Otherwise, just accept the invitation to join the breakout rooms. I'll just run through who is in the breakout rooms and then I'll pass over to Laurel. So each of the breakout rooms are broadly going to look at different areas of different types of public space. Room 1 is green spaces. Artist April Lin will share her work and she'll be joined by Gabriella Gay. And the room is hosted by journalist, fell runner and podcast producer Charlotte Foster. So welcome to all of you. Room 2 is streetscapes. Joyce Iwaszko from Dust Rising will share their pandemic project, Every Other Seat, the very first live event in Stoke-on-Trent post-pandemic. And Nicola Winstanley, an artist with an impressive history of art created in public, will chair the discussion in that room. Room 3 will look at installations. So we've got artist David Bethell from Stoke-on-Trent, who'll talk about his installation work. He'll be joined by Anna Berry, who you've heard from previously, and the discussion will be chaired by Cynthia Coady, who's a filmmaker and presenter. Room 4 is going to look at hyperlocal spaces. We've got lighting designer Daniella Beattie, who will share her project, The Litten Tree, and Anna Francis, who's an artist and academic, will talk about her long experience of working in hyperlocal spaces. Room 4 will be chaired by Professor Carola Boehm, who's the leader of the Create Place course at Staffordshire Uni. Then at 12:45, we'll all come back together to sum up. So that's going to be a really thought-provoking morning. Laurel.
Oh, thank you, Isla, and thank you all for joining us here today. I'm Laurel Gallagher. I'm a co-director of Urban Wilderness CIC as well. As Isla said, this symposium launches our Wastelands 2021 Artist Development Programme, during which we are really excited about working with 5 artists in public spaces across Stoke-on-Trent. At the start of this journey, we wanted to open up a public conversation about what public art can be. We hope that this will challenge our artists and us to make work that has meaning and impact for a wider community of artists and cultural producers. So thank you for taking the time to join us on that journey today. Firstly, I just want to talk a little bit more about the themes and share some of the reasons why we're addressing them as an organisation. So I'm going to start by admitting that we at Urban Wilderness have often felt conflicted about using the term public art at all. And I wanted to share this with you because you may also feel conflicted about what we mean when we talk about public art and what public art means to you. Some concerns that we've had about using the term public art are around assumptions about permanence in space. So does public art have to be permanent? Does it mean statues and monuments? Other concerns are around power and decision making. So who commissions public art and for whose benefit? When we formed Urban Wilderness in 2018, we would never have described our work as public art. And that is partly because it didn't fit with our preconceptions and our prejudices about what public art should be. But our mission as an organisation is to democratise public spaces through arts and culture. And we do work with artists and communities to create art in public spaces. So we thought about it and we realised that really it's us who needed to rethink what public art means to us, what it could mean. So we went through a period of doing quite a lot of thinking and talking about that. And it was while we were rethinking this that we came across the work of the Situations. They're an arts organisation based in Bristol. And during 2013, led by Claire Doherty, they created a piece of work titled New Rules for Public Art. When we read the 12 rules for public art proposed by the Situations, they just really, really resonated with us and our practice, and they challenged some of those preconceptions we had about what public art had to be, and they raised our aspirations about what public art could be. So that's why we've shared them with you. So we've shared them with you in advance, and we will invite you all to use them as a provocation to discuss public art in different situations in your breakout groups later. Our intention is to use the rules as a starting point and to use them to challenge the way that we think about, create and produce public art. Please feel free to interrogate and challenge the ideas presented to you today in the spirit that they are intended, which is of shared learning and open debate. The question of why public art now is one which we might all like to take a little pause to reflect on. I think now is a point when we are in a moment of significant social, cultural and environmental change. Public spaces have become places where our bodies and our actions have never felt so controlled. Our access to public spaces has never felt so fragile and yet so vital. So really now feels like such a pertinent time to be addressing the possibilities for public art, what it could mean, and that's why we brought this event here today. In our conversations today, then we invite you to think about now as a point of change and imagine how public art can be both catalyst and fuel for continuing change into the future. So again, thank you. Moving on to the main event now, we have 3 speakers who I will be introducing to you in a minute. Unfortunately, we don't have time to have any Q&A sessions with the audience and the speakers, but we have our 3rd Urban Wilderness co-director, Jenny Harper, who is our secret weapon. She is behind the scenes. Hi, Jenny. And she is on Twitter live during this session. So if you have any comments that you want to make or any questions you have directly to make to the artists, then please just keep posting on Twitter. Our handle is urban_CIC and use the hashtag #PublicArtNow, and Jenny will try and keep on top of them. Thanks, Jenny. But I would like to now move on to our first speaker. She is Anna Berry. She is an artist based in Milton Keynes who produces just the most breathtaking installations in public spaces. She's going to appear. Yes. Hi, Anna. Thank you for joining us today. And, sorry. Yeah, I know that you've got a presentation to share with us of your work, so I will let you take it away.
Okay, well, thank you so much to Urban Wilderness for asking me to speak today. It's very, very lovely of you. I've just been asked to speak a bit about my work, basically, so I'm kind of hoping that's not going to be terribly dull for everybody. My name's Anna Berry. I'm an artist, and I do a lot of work, pretty much all my work, basically, in public space. I guess I work that way because I don't have a formal arts background. I was just kind of making stuff and putting it in places, and I'm not sure how I became an artist exactly. It's quite a daunting title to kind of bestow upon yourself, but I had always made stuff, and I'd always known since I was a kid that I wanted to be an artist, despite the fact that I couldn't draw. And I was struggling to be able to work and earn a living in a conventional sense because I'm disabled, and making art was something that I'd always done and continued to do. So I started making things and putting them in spaces, and then they got bigger, and then all my mates would help out. And then over a long period of time, I landed up basically professionalizing and starting to get bits of funding to enable me to do bigger things and pay people to help. So I'll kind of start at the beginning and do a bit of a whistle stop, basically, from then till now. So I started off doing a lot of street interventions made of paper. And like a lot of my work, there's a lot of kind of upfront production to make something that's kind of quite materially ephemeral and that just kind of changes space for a moment in time, a little subversive act. I had one curator say that it was undermining of capitalist structures and the determination to effortfully produce something that resists being corralled into a material object with value or longevity, which sounds very fancy schmancy. So Milton Keynes, where I live, this bit's in Iceland actually, but Milton Keynes, where I live, that's Cambridge. It's built on a grid system, and there's all these underpasses everywhere. And so I started using the underpasses as my canvas, basically. So that's kind of where I started out from. And then I had an acquaintance offer to lend me his garden as a location for an open gardens thing. So I did a piece about physics because I like physics, and I made a piece about quantum entanglement called Spooky Action at Proximity. And it's probably best that I don't go into the ins and outs of that right here and now, but if you're interested, you can read about it on my website. Around 2014, I got my first wee commission from Milton Keynes Fringe Festival, and this was my original version of Breathing Room. It's a kinetic piece. Hang on. Yeah, there we go. And it was an attempt to kind of recolonise the commercial space in Milton Keynes for the community. There's a lot of issues in Milton Keynes around ownership of public space. I got the community groups and individuals to donate paper and lots of people to kind of volunteer to help me roll the cones. And then with help from some engineer friends, we created a sort of living, breathing colonisation of the space. So it was amazing that people took to it. I had someone give me their old GCSE work, and another person gave me a copy of their degree certificate. So yeah, this is just me wafting my phone around to try and get a sense of the whole thing. I'll let that play for a minute. Okay, so this is a piece called Fragile Viking, and it's about all sorts of things, disability, yeah, bunch of stuff, really, outsiderness. It was quite a significant piece for me. It was in Iceland, and I was trying to place paper boats in the landscape and on this lava field and in an ice cave. And it was basically an impossible task because the wind would blow them away and my fingers froze and I couldn't place them and my camera battery froze, so I couldn't record them. And I was trying to keep my camera battery in my armpit and then quickly take it out and put it in and take a photo. And it was all kind of nuts. And the whole experience made me realise that my process wasn't just straight installation. It was a kind of hinterland between sort of long, performative, repetitive makes and then an ephemeral installation event and then recording. This is a piece called Paradise Lost, which was a collaboration with the homeless community at the time in Milton Keynes. So work I did with MK Fringe again for the 50th anniversary of Milton Keynes. And there's a lot of fireworks and that kind of thing for the 50th anniversary, but I wanted to kind of chat to people who maybe weren't having the best time in MK. And I was trying to sort of contrast really how we all try to be the architects of our own lives, just as the architects of Milton Keynes we're trying to plan a sort of utopian vision, and sometimes that doesn't go right for us all. So I sort of hooked up with a local charity and we chatted to a lot of the local homeless community, and I'd been donated a load of original plans of houses in Milton Keynes because I'm sort of, when an architect's office closed, I think it was, and I'm sort of known as the person who takes weird paper to do things with. And we basically just chatted to folk about how they felt about Milton Keynes. And while we chatted, we filmed people's hands ripping up the plans. And then we presented the piece as a film inside the tent in the underpass with the ripped plans on the outside. And then the title Paradise Lost was suggested by one of the guys who participated, which I thought was like such a great title for it. Oh, I was supposed to scroll through those, sorry. Doing two things at once. Okay, this is the Constantly Moving Happiness Machine, and this was in a library, so it's not outside, but it's still public space rather than gallery space kind of thing. And it was my first kind of properly funded piece, really, and it was with an Arts Council project grant in the lower bracket. And it's kind of, I should find the wee film thing and play it in the background. Oh, here we go. Yeah, it's basically a metaphor for the individual's relationship to and participation in consumer capitalism. And the idea is that participants are kind of seduced into turning the crank because they're charmed by the motion of the objects, and a desire is kind of gratified in the same way it is when we kind of buy and consume. But then at the same time, they're kind of participating unknowingly in a sort of wider machine that they're animating. And then the sort of books that this is made of are quite ideological texts whose ideas kind of underpin kind of market fundamentalist type ideas. And I'm basically really fascinated by the tacit consent we give to our subconscious being manipulated by advertising and PR and kind of shaping us into compliant consumers. So in essence, I'm kind of tricking people into taking part into a consensual colonization of their subconscious. So I did a talk and an event with a guy from Goldsmiths where he talked about economic degrowth, and yeah, it was really good. It was really fun. I mean, like most of my work at art, people don't really see it. It's all like normal people, basically. So this is a piece called Fake Plastic Trees, a Memorial to the Midsummer Oak. So there's a lot of ins and outs to this, so I'll try and like be really short about it. But basically Milton Keynes, the plans of Milton Keynes was built according to a sun temple, and on Midsummer's Day, the sun goes down Midsummer's Boulevard. And there was a tree called the Midsummer Oak that was there as well, that was very kind of beloved in the town. And they tried, well, they wanted to build a shopping centre basically, and they couldn't tear down the oak. And they built the shopping centre, you know, across Midsummer Boulevard, which was, you know, huge kind of really Philistine thing to do, really in contravention to all the planning ideals of Milton Keynes. And then the Oak staged this kind of, they built the shopping centre around the Oak in the end, and the Oak staged this kind of tremendous protest, really, by agonisingly dying over a period of 10 years. And I got a friend of mine in the Parks Trust to nick a little fragment of this oak after it died and been pulled down, and I built this piece in memorial to the oak. And it was kind of really the apotheosis of how nuts my practice can get, really, because it was like a 14 by 10 metre pop-up piece, which took about 6 months to make, but lasted for about 2 hours. And it involved a whole team of my mates helping me to install it on the day. And at the showing, you know, we had like musicians and poets performing, and we got out about 300 people on a rainy Tuesday, which wasn't bad. None of whom were art people, of course. So yeah, like a lot of my work in Milton Keynes, it was about planning practices in the town and stuff. But basically people donated photographs of the life and times of Milton Keynes. So there's these tiny, tiny little photographs of people's memories of the trees, that's the concrete cows. And they were all embedded in this kind of sacred forest. And the idea is you would weave through the sacred forest, and you would touch this fragment of the oak that I had, like a kind of medieval saint's relic, essentially, was the conceit. So yeah. And then lastly, this is where I am now. So this is the second version of Breathing Room, which is, you know, from the sublime to the ridiculous, really. The last piece was massive and totally unfunded, and this is hugely funded by a funder called Unlimited. and it's a big touring version of Breathing Room. So it's just about to premiere at Milton Keynes International Festival in a couple of weeks, about a month actually, so it's a bit terrifying, and we're hoping to be able to go out and tour it in various locations. And again, I'm sort of not really expecting galleries and stuff to show. I don't know really. I sort of think it's more public space type thing really, but it's not paper anymore, it's Tyvek, so it's totally suitable for kind of outside showings and that kind of thing. And yeah, that's it really. That's where I am now. I hope that wasn't too garbled, and yeah, it was reasonably enjoyable for people. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, Anna. That is just really inspiring, I think, to see the scale of your work as well, starting from those, those small interventions in spaces, you just making things from your own desire, then that process of how it scales up to such an incredibly, like you said, well-funded and large-scale piece, which I hope we'll be able to come down and visit it, and that's something for everybody here. I'm sure Jenny will be able to share details of that with people, and I hope lots of people come to see your work. It's really inspiring. Thanks again for taking the time to be with us today. So, gosh, that was wonderful. What an amazing start. The next speaker that we have is Ellie Harris, who is the executive producer at Greenwich Docklands International Festival. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here today, but she has really kindly put together a presentation for us, which is so informative. She's sharing her experiences of producing the festival during 2020. She references a film in it, which we will be showing to you in the break. So you'll be able to see that later, but I don't think it impacts too much on what she's talking about. So that should come up on the screen anytime now.
Hello, I'm Ellie. I'm the executive producer for festival.org and Greenwich and Docklands International Festival. I'm really sorry I can't be with you there sort of live today, but thank you for bearing with me and for having me. So a quick précis about who we are. As you saw from the video, that's the kind of usual events that we do as a festival. They're large, they're outdoors, they're real spectacle events with thousands of people gathering together. And as of last year, we weren't able to do that anymore. We were really lucky to be able to deliver a 17-day live event outdoors following the first UK lockdown, and we were the first to go. So there were a lot of eyes on us, and there was a lot of making up guidance sort of as we went and not knowing and finding our feet. But we managed to reach over 21,000 audience members. And no reports of COVID on our track and trace system. So that's something good, I think. I think the main things I'd like to tell you about today are sort of artists and how we sort of adapted our programming, to talk about the different types of sites that we used in response to last year and what we will take going forward from that. And also just sort of kind of being responsive and what learning has been really, really helpful, how we reached audiences and how we were kind of furthering our reach as well. So in terms of artists, we typically sort of 70 or 80% of our programme is international based work, and we couldn't do that last year. We did manage to have a couple of international companies, which felt like a huge win, but certainly I know this is still a problem for many of us going forward with Brexit as well. So we dramatically reduced and kind of stayed with UK artists to kind of damage control against COVID and the travel restrictions, which, when you've put lots of work into something and then have to cancel it last minute, it's not nice for everyone. In fact, there was a lot of kind of doing the work, undoing the work. So resilience is kind of key and will be key again for this year, especially as insurers aren't covering anything at the moment. So more UK artists. And also smaller companies as well. So we did a lot of work into how work was not only being performed safely in a COVID safe way, but how it was being rehearsed and how people were travelling to site. And it was a really organic conversation with artists to sort of model through together. And I think a lot of them found it incredibly stressful, but incredibly useful as well. And we really saw the kind of adaptability and resilience of the artists as well to chop and change things quite quickly. The scale of our performances changed dramatically. So we couldn't do the huge spectacle. Instead, we did lots of smaller events and kind of more smaller events as well. So just sort of quantity, not negating the quality, of course. We developed a program called On Your Doorstep, which took small scale pop-up theatre, dance performance to basketball courts and small areas literally on people's doorsteps, so that we weren't encouraging people to come from miles away. We were saying either walk or cycle to site, and just getting a few bits of ped barrier to lock your bikes up to with a security guard on it. Really interesting to not market a festival that you would normally market in the same ways. But so yeah, looking at sort of what was already in place, basketball courts were great because they're hard standing and they already have barriers around them. So you've got your ingress and egress points, and you've got that audience control. And it was a really, I mean, we do a lot of work in the communities anyway, and we really embed ourselves in town centres and public spaces, but this was like a level beyond. And we genuinely, I wholeheartedly believe and know from speaking to some of the community members around there that this was a game changer. They could literally walk out of their house and see something happening. They didn't have to go into the town centre, or they didn't have to go into a space that they couldn't, if they're shielding or vulnerable and they don't go very far, they just go to the shop. And positioning these shows so that if you've got tower blocks around a basketball court, could you have it facing that way so people can watch from their balconies? And they did. But yeah, then enhancing that audience by having people watching from their balconies or their houses was a big part in kind of developing our audience numbers. I know that's a really important thing for funders and stakeholders and partners. They want the footfall, they want the people. So that's quite a delicate balance. The other thing we did was look at installations. It's not something we'd typically done before. And it came out of wanting to program work that was considerate of the time that we were in a pandemic, the Black Lives Matter resurgence of that movement. So programming work that was wasn't a massive party, but also would allow us to reach larger numbers of audiences. So an installation on 4 days, we could have continuous audience flow and manage that crowd and, still keep distance and reach higher numbers than, I don't know, a piece of dance that has 50 people seated watching it. So we had an installation called In Memoriam by Luke Jerram, which was 120 flags made from hospital bed sheets. They were white in a circle with a blue cross for the NHS in the middle. And we situated that next to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Woolwich, which was really hard hit during the pandemic. And that was just there for people to come and see. Audiences could self-regulate, self-manage. It meant we reached a lot of people. And depending on how you count your audience figures, there's a lot of people that walk on that common, so count them in the audience figures. But no, it was kind of programming more work that reacted to the current economic, socio-political, all of those things, which we do when we program, but it felt even more pertinent this year. And another really lovely project we did was a moving bicycle piece called Lullaby. And it was 50 participant volunteers who rigged their bikes up with fairy lights, and they rode around a local neighbourhood with a predetermined route at night time with playing out a lullaby that had been pre-recorded and collected from residents in the local area and composed into this beautiful soundtrack. And they drove past people's doorsteps at bedtime. This is the bike going past, to put people to sleep at bedtime, not in the veterinary way, in the relaxing way. So it was that's asking audiences to come to their doorsteps and watch rather than come out and see stuff. That's not to say that we didn't invite audiences down. We did. We just did it in a very different way, and there had to be a lot more control over our audiences. Interestingly, seating people on benches worked really well, and that is something that we will be taking forward into next year. I think with outdoor arts, it's really easy for people to just sort of bundle together and try and get to the front and sit on the grass, but benches just helped even with sight lines, and sitting people together in groups really worked as well. So that's how the sort of programming side of things changed. We didn't have, the chandelier hanging up 50 meters above people's heads and everyone dancing together. And that's not to say that that won't happen again, but it feels like that wasn't the right tone. The other thing that we had to consider was site. So I've talked a little bit about the basketball courts and having more manageable kind of small sites. We also looked at larger brownfield sites because they are inherently a lot bigger than, a town centre. They've got a bit more breathing room, and which is great because as long as, the roadmap and all of the government advice is fine, you can fit a lot of people on there. And it really built audience confidence to know that they got the space and they could kind of move out of the way if they wanted to. So brownfield sites definitely good for upping those audience numbers as well. And it's stuff we've used before and stuff we will continue to use again. So yes, that's a little bit about sites. Talking about audiences, we actually reached, so the footfall just over the festival was lower, but we still sort of reached over 21,000 live audience members, and that was just in person. On top of that, we had our digital reach as well. As a festival, we couldn't just go digital. We don't have stuff that we can film. It is very much in public space, and that's what we're funded for. And if we don't do that, then we don't get the money and we can't continue as an organisation. So we started to think about, okay, well, our funders want us to reach this many people. How can we do this? And we don't have the money to do all the kind of fancy live stream. It costs a lot of money, especially when you're in the middle of nowhere on a brownfield site and there's no Wi-Fi. So we tried some pre-record and then stream later kind of things. And we also did a little bit of cheap and cheerful Instagram live, Facebook live video as well. Reaching different audiences, I think going super local, hyper local, like being right in the middle of a housing estate helped grow our audiences. The digital enhancement really helped enhance audiences. And then thinking about that larger scale. So the larger scale site, the larger scale installation based work that was for a duration. So usually we do like a one night performance. We have also, this year going into 2021, we're recognizing that there is an appetite. People have missed theatre and performance and dance, and instead of just doing one day, why don't we do 3 days? And yes, there is a cost associated with that, and as a free festival, that's something really hard because as soon as you do an overnight, you've got your security costs, but it really does help to spread your audiences. And if you've got your infrastructure there, it's a sort of, once you've sorted your funding, is an easy way to reach more people. I hope that's helpful. As I say, I am absolutely up for talking to some of you if you have got a few questions, but just please bear in mind that there's a lot going on, and our festival programme is the biggest it's ever been this year. It is the 27th of August to the 11th of September. Maybe I'll see some of you there. But it was a pleasure to talk to you all, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much for having me.
Wow. Well, we're so grateful to Ellie for taking the time to put that together for us. And I think it's just, it's just really interesting as cultural producers to realise that in a lot of ways we're all in the same boat. There's a lot of learning, a lot of testing going on. And I think to have somebody sharing their experience from such an enormous scale event with us is, I hope it's been valuable anyway. We found it really interesting. And we're certainly going to try and make it down to some of the events that they'll be running this year. Our final speaker today is Gabriella Gay. She is a page stage poet, a creative producer and chair of the Kwanzaa Collective. Her work is based in Stoke-on-Trent, and we were honoured to work with her as lead artist of the Taking Up Space project as part of our Wastelands 2020 programme. Hi, Gabriella.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us today, and I'll let you carry on with your presentation.
So I'm Gabriella, daughter of Gwendolyn, daughter of Eileen, daughter of Cleo. And I just wanted to honour my foremothers into this space, but also to honour Urban Wilderness for creating this commission. It was a Wastelands commission that I'm going to talk about. And also all of you for being here to listen. So thank you very much. So I'm going to share my screen so I don't have my face full screen for all of you, and talk a little bit about taking up space. So I'm a poet and I'm a founding member of Kwanzaa Collective UK, as just was mentioned. And if you don't know Kwanzaa Collective UK, we're an association of artists, activists and academics of colour, and we're based in Staffordshire. But a lot of the work that we're doing is a part of a wider conversation. So I was the lead artist on Taking Up Space. And Taking Up Space is a dance poetry film based on the experiences of Black women walking in Staffordshire. But in calling it Taking Up Space, it's kind of directly feeding into like a larger movement and conversation that encourages the unheard voices of women and people of colour, centering and amplifying them in spaces where they're kind of often sidelined. So, and in this case, we're talking about natural spaces, urban green spaces. So it's really important for us to kind of really listen into Black and brown people's experiences of these spaces. How are they experiencing them? And especially how are they experiencing them in 2020? So, you've missed that a little bit. So I wanted to share that there were two distinct parts to Taking Up Space. First, we walked with a group of Black women in different spaces in Staffordshire, and then we created poetry and a film and a dance. So that was the slide before that you would have seen a beautiful picture, but I'm just going to go and talk about this bit. So I think it's really important for us to think of the context for the art that this was created from. So we know during the pandemic that we were all weathering the same storm, but we weren't all in the same boat. So one of the things that was really important, I want you to understand, is the context for Taking Up Space came from some of the concerns about the health and safety of Black women. So in March, so quite early in the pandemic, the ONS report came out, which was talking about the disproportionate way that Black and brown people were being affected by the coronavirus. So the death rates were quite high, infection rates were quite high, sometimes even 4 times more likely to die. So if you can imagine how scary that statistic was, and how that would have affected women walking in Staffordshire or wanting to go out during this time. On the 10th of May, the Girl Trek launched Daughters Of, which was a tribute to the wisdom and healing practices and self-care traditions of Black mothers and women. And Kwanzaa Collective UK started at the same point. So we started at a point of thinking about healthcare and the care of women and people within our community. So we started a Daughters Of group. And what the Daughters Of group was every 2 weeks, we would check in with Black women, and we also did it with Black men, and thinking about well-being and how we're going to look after ourselves during this time when a lot of our family members and people within our community were dying or getting very ill, people were feeling very scared, very tense, and a lot of people had to continue working as well. And then we come to the 25th of May, where we know we had the unjust killing of George Floyd. And, you know, when those videos came out, the ones that were made by the witness and security cameras being published and sparked a worldwide BLM protests, the impact of that was that while some people were asking lots of questions, other people were shouting their opinions, sometimes out of cars or in shops or in parks. So you can imagine what the walking experience was like for those Black women and men and people within our community, how scary that must have been in terms of their safety. And not forgetting the Brexit and the kind of tense and hostile environment that created. So all of these things were in our mind and impacting before we created the art. And also thinking about, if you're unaware, that your ethnicity can increase your risk of developing heart and coronary diseases in the UK. So there's lots of research which shows that. So high blood pressure and a stroke, or type 2 diabetes. So thinking about the health and safety was kind of fundamental and underlying the work that we were doing in this project, even though we were creating a piece of art. So art and activism, I suppose, work alongside each other in the work that we do. And we were really inspired by these organisations. So Girl Trek, if you've never heard of Girl Trek before, they are a global movement of Black women walking, and they use walking as a practical first step to increase physical activity, to improve access to safe places to walk and protect and reclaim green spaces. And it's really inspiring the way that they are building community. And I really particularly love their Harriet Tubman principle, which is, you save yourself first, so you think about your health and your well-being, but then you go back and you save a sister, and you go back and you build that community. So that was really key and important to our thinking for taking up space. But equally, I'm not sure if you know of the Black Men Walking, which was changed into a theatre show, but that was inspired by Yorkshire-based 100 Black Men's Walking for Health. So these were a group of Black men that were going out into the hills and walking, taking up space, creating these communities. So I feel that was really important before we even started doing the work on creating our own community and taking up space. So as I was saying before, there were two kind of distinct but parallel and important stages. So we had a stage where we did a lot of walking and talking. And so our Daughters of group, which we had formed earlier on based on the Girl Trek movement, they were kind of key, and we kind of built on that group because we were already having those conversations about well-being and meditating online and keeping checked in and starting to build this community. So it was the perfect opportunity for us to go outside. We hadn't been outside at any point, and to have more women join us. And in doing that, we started having conversations about what is it like for them, what are they experiencing while walking alone in Staffordshire. Quite a few of them reported how scary it was, and I know myself personally how scary that experience was. And then in the park, and that was quite interesting because it was probably the first time we'd actually come together. So walking, how did they experience walking in the park? So we went to Hanley Park and walked around as a group and just, did some creative activities while walking. So we were really present. And then in Wild Spaces, and the dancers joined us for this. And we went round to the back of Staff's Uni, and we walked in the Wild Spaces, which had lots of different dynamics, and just talked about how they felt walking as a group, how they felt walking in that wild space. So yeah, it was really interesting to hear the different responses. We wrote poems and we talked, and so that was a really key part to taking up space. And then we went on to, you took all those responses, those poems, and we had essentially 3 pieces of artworks that was created, the final one being the film. But what I did was I created some verbatim poetry, so trying to stick as closely as possible to the words of the women and their stories, one about walking alone, a section about walking alone, a section about walking in the park, and then a section about walking in wild spaces. And then the dancers, they embodied those words. So they didn't work from my poetry, they worked directly from the words of the women. And they were led by Caroline Moraldo of Moraldo DC. So what they did was combine, she's a specialist Africanistic movement. So she combined Africanistic movement, and they combined it each with a contemporary dance form. So Shanice was really key on street dance. So she combined the Africanistic movement with street dance to embody some of those stories. And then finally, you can see Cynthia Coady there, who created a film. So Cynthia created a narrative film. Cynthia's here. So she took the poem and then those dance moves, but then she created her own piece of artwork from that. So even the way that she shot it, her viewpoint created a different piece of artwork. So I think it was really interesting to comment that we had 3 kind of different artistic responses to those same words. And that was always checked back with the women to see how, is this the way that they wanted their words or their stories to be portrayed of walking in Staffordshire. So what's the legacy of taking up space? So Cynthia created 2 films actually, and we took lots of photographs. So she created one which is an archive, and I feel like archiving is really key and important for us as Black artists and as a community, because so much of our history has been lost. So we had an archive film, but equally we had Taking Up Space film, which is a creative response as well. And that was chosen for the West Midlands democratising creativity and culture. It was shortlisted for Staffordshire Day Film Award and projected onto the building at Keele University as part of Strong British in Black, which was an exhibition that we, Kwanzaa Collective, did at Keele University in collaboration with Arts Keele. One of the really lovely things that I really like about this project is the communities that we're creating. We've created an artistic community of these different art forms working together, or the dancers who hadn't worked together before. But also we had the community of the women who didn't know each other. And I feel like that's important because a lot of Black and brown women and people are quite isolated within Staffordshire in a way. There aren't the same kind of networks really. So it's really great for them to come together and find these other women. But Shanice Harris, who was working as one of the dancers as part of Meraldo DC, she actually joined Meraldo DC. So after that creative process, working together, they enjoyed working together and moving together so much that they were actually working together, continue to work together as a dance group. So that was really fascinating. And the Daughters of African Essence, which we're now thinking of calling Staffordshire Sisters Walking and Wellbeing Group, we continue to walk throughout the pandemic. So there was, we continued to support each other and walk and have wellbeing activities. And that was pretty vital, I think, and really essential to the wellbeing of those women throughout that time. And for us as Kwanzaa Collective UK, we very quickly realised that health and well-being for Black people is a real key strand of the work that we are doing. So we work with young people, we're working with developing artists, but health and well-being at the point where we started is really key strand of the work that we do. And of course, we're going to continue kind of claiming space within the city and, taking up space and finding all these kind of places that are close to walk and to claim as our own. And, I equally know that I put it on the social art network as well, the social art library. So that was listed on there. So I think there's something really key and important about the work that we did on this and the formations of this walking group, wellbeing group, but also in terms of how Black and brown people, especially women, feel about the area that we live in.
Thank you, Gabby. Thank you so much for sharing that journey with us, and to see it from the start, I think it's just great. I think such an impact, such an important issue to start with, and then that process that you went through, the inspiration of connecting with the other groups, focusing on health and well-being first and foremost, but then the quality of the art. And we'll be sharing the film, Cynthia Coady's film, during the break, so everybody will get a chance to experience that, which is, it's just stunning. And I think it will be so meaningful having heard your story behind it now as well. So, thank you very much, and we'll see you in the breakout room later.
Thank you.
Isla.
So now we're going to have a 15-minute break. Stand up, shake it out, do whatever you need to do. And as we've said, we'll be sharing those 2 films during the next 15 minutes. The first one is the pre-pandemic view of the Greenwich and Docklands International Festival, which will be inspiration. We'll all be hightailing it down there in August. And then we're going to see Cynthia's film of the Taking Up Space project. So we will see you back at 12:15. Hello, hi, welcome back. I hope you all enjoyed those films. If anybody missed them because you were doing other things, then we are going to share the links to those films on Twitter. Just to remind you, if you wanted to tweet about anything for the rest of the event, then we're using the hashtag Public Art Now, and we are urban_CIC on Twitter. So thank you. We've got a little bit of extra time in the breakout rooms. We're going to have an extra 5 minutes and then a little bit longer to wrap up because we were running slightly ahead of time. So we're just about to go into the breakout rooms where you'll be introduced to some more amazing art in public spaces, and then we get an opportunity to have a chat. So just to remind you that the breakout rooms are discussion spaces, so please be aware that people might be speaking, saying half-formed thoughts in the spirit of productive discussion. And the breakout rooms you will be allocated to, they are Room 1, Green Spaces, with artist April Lin, Gabriella Gay, and hosted by Charlotte Foster. Room 2 is Streetscapes, with Joyce from Dust Rising, and Nicola Winstanley will host that room. Room 3 is Installations, with David Bethell and Anna Berry, and hosted by Cynthia Coady, whose film that we've just watched. And Room 4 is Hyperlocal Green Spaces, with lighting designer Daniella Beattie, artist and academic Anna Francis, and that is hosted by Carola Boehm from Staffs University. So we are going to, once we've heard from those artists, we're going to take a look at the new rules of public art as proposed by Situations. And the rules are provocations, they are not rules, they are ideas. So please have a nice time discussing these. Just to go through the rules, number 1, it doesn't have to look like public art. Number 2, it's not forever. Number 3, don't make it for a community, create a community. Number 4, create space for the unplanned. Number 5, withdraw from the cultural arms race. Number 6, demand more than fireworks. Number 7, don't embellish, interrupt. Number 8, share ownership freely, but authorship wisely. Number 9, welcome outsiders. Number 10, don't waste time on definitions. 11, suspend your disbelief. And number 12, get lost. Okay, I hope you all have productive sessions, and we'll see you all back here at 12:40. Thank you very much.
Inspiration comes from observing things in daily life and daydreaming about them, and then using video to transform those thoughts into something that can be seen on film. And, I also really like that making films in public space versus, renting a studio or building a set is environment friendly, resource friendly, and financially accessible. So you don't have to buy a lot of things that you then dispose of, but rather your materials exist there before you and continue to exist after your project. A recurring part of my work in public spaces is related to nature. I think this has a lot to do with my upbringing in Sweden, where I was really lucky to have access to a lot of nature. There's a beautiful lake a 15-minute way from my home, and you have to walk through this really dense patch of coniferous forest to get there. And it was often in these kinds of green spaces where I could go to dream and imagine undisturbed, with new ideas and sensations, often resulting in places I had been to countless times before. So the stills I have had in this presentation so far are from my film Our Rest that I made in 2019 when I was artist in residence at Supernormal Residency, which is hosted by Braziers Park, which is an intentional alternative living community that was founded in Oxfordshire in the 1950s as a reaction to the Second World War. So because they co-own and they co-run the land around the estate, for instance, a lot of their food is grown on location and they kind of self-sustain in that manner. I was really reminded of the many ways our relationship to land and to time can actually look different. So I'd been struggling with resting and kind of mental health things for a while. And being there became a reminder of how easy rest can actually be. So this film resulted from me and Samir, who was a fellow artist in residence, just taking a walk around the grounds one day and filming these shots where I just lay down to rest in lots of different textures of nature, places where you might usually not lay, like prostrate on the ground, and just feeling the earth simply pushing back up against me and supporting me. And the film then grew to, encompass footage of me resting in both green and urban spaces in London, and me interviewing people about their relationship to rest and how that ties in with mental health, but also, class inequalities and our ideas of work. So the photos on the next couple of slides are some work in progress stills from my upcoming film, Tending to Ta, which premieres 3rd of July at a gallery called Obsidian Coast. Here, this footage comes from a world that I've written where characters live their lives in a society where structures of race, class, and gender were never really invented. Instead, something that structures their reality is a morning offering that they do every day, where first thing they do each morning is basically give thanks to the bountifulness of the natural world around them. So we traveled to different locations, mostly in the south and southwest of England, and would dialogue with that specific place and the kinds of textures, and beings, and shapes that exist there to create this morning offering. I'd had some movements and shots in mind, but a lot of it was left quite open and was improvised on site. And we had to navigate very tricky kind of weather conditions a lot of the time, which I think is one of the hidden blessings of working in nature. I think in those moments, you're really reminded that you don't have as much control over your project as you think, and you're kind of humbled almost. But yeah, when leaving each place, I would always as well thank the space and the beings who live there for allowing us to be there. And I'm also thanking them in the end credits of the film, because I think it's important to acknowledge that they are collaborators too, and that the film genuinely wouldn't be the same without them. And I think one thing that's really specific to making art in or with public spaces of nature is how it encourages you to try out new possibilities. I find a lot of urban design has been very ingrained into how we move. You shouldn't crawl with your arms when you want to walk upstairs. You're not meant to wipe your whole body against a wall when you walk past it. But making art in nature and being nature is almost like a shortcut to rewriting those habits and to ground into the sensations of moving or the act of doing something, which kind of made me think of this part of Rule 10 from the New Rules of Public Art, which was, does it move you? Does it shake up your perceptions of the world around you? Does it make you curious to see more? I wanted to kind of end on a note that being able to perform in the public space is not something I want to take for granted, partly because these public spaces and our right to interact with them and engage with them is something that has been eroded over time. For instance, if you look at England and Wales, who have restricted the right to roam in certain sites only, and the right to roam, for those who don't know, is kind of the right for the general public to access land or lakes and rivers for recreation and exercise. So it's the right that kind of protects your right to go for a swim or go for a hike and prevents that from becoming illegal. I also want to draw attention to something that kind of follows on from Gabriella's keynote presentation, which is that it's unfortunately not as safe for everyone to make public art or make art in public spaces. I once met someone at a party whose performance practice was just him urinating on different public monuments in central London. And he had never once worried about being stopped by security or the police, and that never happened to him. Whereas that would be one of my top concerns if I were to make art like that. And I think especially if you're Black, brown, LGBTQ and or disabled, that worry is extra legitimate because acts and engagements with public space can be misinterpreted as wrong or destructive or even illegal. And the chances of someone calling some kind of law enforcement does increase, which in turn only worsens the situation. And so I think ensuring that my work can still draw from the creativity and the generativeness of making art in public and public spaces, while still making sure my collaborators and I feel safe and comfortable, is something I'm still learning about in my own projects. And I think that's something that I will continuously practice in the future, as each situation kind of requires different kinds of attentiveness and care. But yeah, thank you to Urban Wilderness for inviting me to present. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts and questions and just ponderings in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, April. So we're going to have a quick, I say quick, we can have as long as we want. We can have a discussion about these 12 rules. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to share my screen so that we can put the rules up. And I want to sort of, don't know, April and Gabriella, if there's any rules in particular while I'm screen sharing. I used to get paid to talk for a living. Can you believe it? While I'm sharing my screen, just as any sort of rules that really speak to you for either you think they're perfect, or they speak to you because you're really angry, or what reaction do you have to them in particular? So I'll just get my share going. There we go. So hopefully you can see the screen there. Can we all see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Fabulous. Okay. So, April and Gabby, if you want to, if there's, first of all, just was there anyone in particular that sticks out for you? I can see you nodding furiously, April, go for it.
I think it's the one that I referenced in the presentation as well that really rings true to me in a specific way, which is number 10, don't waste time on definitions. Because I think the art I make is part of, a general practice of just living, to be honest. And that it's really in line with a lot of other work that I do, like emotional work, healing work, ancestral work, etc. But something that ties across all of these spaces is just that, like, don't waste time on definitions, and like recognizing, where do definitions come from? Who's the person or whoever that has said that this is a certain way of doing things? How does that make me feel when I am expected, or when I expect myself to follow them? How can I do things differently in a way that rings true to me? And I guess in terms of public art, it's a lot of, kind of unseeing. I think I mentioned it, these ways that we're meant to be doing things, ways we're meant to be making art, ways we're meant to take up public space, and just rewriting that into ways that feel more expansive and feel like they think beyond how we're meant to do things. Maybe I just do want to squat on the floor for a bit, for like 30 minutes as part of my practice. Who says I can't?
How about you, Gabriella?
There's a few, actually. I think probably one that kind of probably best resonates with my practice is don't make it for a community, create a community. So I think traditionally people have thought like, okay, so there's those people that decide what the community would like, or what should be in that space. I think that co-collaborating and working with the community, them deciding what they would like in that space, whether it's temporary or whether it is something a little bit more permanent, not forever though, because I do think that public art needs to evolve and change. And if we start getting into that conversation about sculptures, how we modernize and change things, and how does it reflect our society now? So yeah, I think those kind of jump out to me, I suppose, in terms of the way that I think about my practice. I suppose the other one that was quite interesting is demand more than fireworks, because I do really value, so I know that there's a difference between spectacle and awe, and I know that the power of awe in terms of changing people's thinking or thoughts about a particular art, and there's a real power in that. But spectacle, sometimes I don't see sometimes I think doing some of those kind of smaller, more sustained pieces of public art are really valuable, as I'd say more than just having spectacle. But I do see the value in awe. I think that awe is quite important. Yeah,
demand more than fireworks made me smile, because I think when I think of obviously fireworks in the most literal sense, is I think of a real coming together and a creation of a community, because everyone is sitting there or standing there watching the big bonfire and watching the fireworks, and there's that sense of being, and there's a sense of place, and that sense of everyone being together. But also it is that, as you say, it needs to be something a bit more than that momentarily thing. What's the impact going to be? What's the long term going to be? And that in particular. So when it comes to public art in green spaces, what you talk a lot about, we all talk about community a lot. I think we can't have art without a community, really. how do you create that community then? If we're going for don't make it for a community, create a community. April, you're nodding.
Me thinking to myself, like,
It's a good nod.
Yeah, I think one thing I've been trying to practice, and something I definitely have not like mastered, I don't think you ever can, is just really trying to approach your collaborations. Like, I guess in the video, I feel like the collaborators are the people I'm making it with, but also the people that are watching it. And I think taking them into account is really important in creating that sense of like, oh, this piece is made for you to experience as well. In the sense of, in terms of accessibility, for instance, just making sure like what you do feels like everyone can engage in it on some kind of level, and that how care kind of seeps through. I mean, writing emails is so long and we do it all the time, but how it's actually a very caring kind of gesture. And in a sense, it almost feels like at the end of a really long project, you think about all these emails you've sent, all these video calls you've had, all these meetings you've had, and you're like, actually, each of those was a gesture of care, and all of them have come together to build a sense of like, it's not just that I'm paying you to do this service, or you've paid a ticket, bought a ticket to watch this piece, you know, we've come together to kind of share in this moment. And it's, I don't know, it's just like this tiny awareness I feel like I'm really trying to practice and learn about, and that a lot of people have taught me as well, and how they host their projects.
I love that description of an email as it's a showing of care. And I was like, oh God, the emails that I write, I really should think about them in that way a lot more. I think we could all benefit from that. Gabriella, what about you when it comes to community? Because obviously a lot of what you do is very community based.
Yeah, I think it's, like what April was saying about care and process. I think spending more time. So we spent 6 weeks on taking up space, but it could have been nice. But we did have that pre-existing group that we built on, that we'd already been checking in, spending that care, talking about well-being, doing well-being activities. I'm not sure if it would have worked in the same way if we only had 3, if the women would have been so open and willing during the pandemic, if we only had like that 3-week period and then 3 weeks for creation. So I feel like the process and the care that's taken in that is really important. And I know that Susan Clark's here, and we've had lots of conversations in terms of BArt, because Kwanzaa did a project which was about care with them, and really delving into how important it is that caring with collaborators, caring about the artist, caring about yourself throughout the process. I think that's really important for making a community, and especially to do a piece of that working towards or working together to do a piece of artwork. I think it's kind of important to be kind of clear about what everyone's getting out of it, if that makes any sense. So like at the beginning, they knew that we were going to make something. We didn't know what it was. Like we were kind of just going along. We knew there was going to be like a vague plan of thing, but we didn't know exactly what that would look like, and leaving space for that within the creation to just be like, yeah, because we're just going to actually properly listen to your stories and show care in that process. So yeah, I feel like that's important.
And did you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, it's partly because this one also struck me as really important. I'm not an artist, by the way. At best, I commission people to commission art, but this sort of phrase, "Don't make it for a community, create a community," and yet the way in which both April and Gabriella have just been describing this has been much more about co-collaboration with communities that, to an extent, already exist and have connections. To me, that this one felt like it was centering the art and centering the artist in a way which I suppose I wasn't necessarily totally comfortable with, and which I don't think, from what Gabriella's art, neither Gabriella's art nor April's art does it. To me, it feels like the with word is missing there a little bit. and there's an element of building on existing communities that it's difficult to put it in a pithy phrase, isn't it? Which is probably why it's not quite in there in this in these new rules. But I just wondered, how centred should the public art be in this process of community creation? I suppose is the question I'm moving towards.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, actually, the missing of the width, because I suppose for us, we did create the community, and we have been creating lots of different communities, but we didn't create a community specifically for that artwork. But there are other times where we do have created a temporary community, specifically for an art piece, or a piece of like Mother to Mother, for example, recently, that was working with mothers who had children of colour. So we created a temporary community working together, doing different artworks, having conversations, and then a piece of work was created, stories, and then that community still exists in a loose form, but not in the same way. So yeah, there is, I think probably you could put another statement in there, which is create with a community, create a community. But I think this particular phrase is talking about those temporary communities that are created. For example, the work that I do when I'm working with We Stoke, that is temporary. Those temporary communities are created to do that co-collaborated piece of artwork, and then that community still exists in a loose form, but not in such a structured way, I suppose. But yeah, width is definitely important.
Do you think those communities should then be carried on after they've been created for these sorts of purposes? Because you mentioned Restoke and the work they've done with the Upmen, and the Upmen themselves have really carried on that little community. So Upmen was a project that Restoke did about men's mental health in Stoke-on-Trent, and it was brilliant. And the Upmen are a group of men who've sort of carried on that little group together with themselves to stick together and work together. And I think that was kind of a really good example of a community that's come from a piece of art that's then carried on from there onwards. I don't know if anyone else, you're all welcome to join in and talk, it's not just a sit and listen to us sort of conversation, it's a conversation where we're all part of it. So if anyone at any point, you can either raise your hand or just put your mic off mute and chat with us as well. So if anyone else has sort of like seen any of those 12 rules and just got any thoughts on them at all, please join in and let me know. That'd be really good to know, because it's what we're all here for.
I feel like something you said, Gabriella, that stuck with me is the being able to differentiate between spectacle and awe. And it was like, the way you put it is just so clear, and it's something I've been kind of mulling over for so long, I feel like. And then when you just said it, it was just quite obvious, and how that really distinguishes like a very specific bodily feeling of when you see something and you're like really impressed, but it doesn't evoke that kind of like, oh, I want to take this feeling forward and like pass it on to people around me. And yeah, how that very subtle difference, I feel like, is a big igniting force in whether something is impressive, I don't know, gets a lot of views, gets a lot of traction, but something whether that could be quite small scale, but actually like changes lives and creates, I don't know, motivates other people to want to carry that forward. And I just, it's just, yeah, thanks for saying that, because it's just a nice grounding, solid point to hear.
So when it comes to green spaces, which is obviously the focus of this breakout room, I thought I'd bring it back in. What in particular do you think are the challenges for public art in green spaces?
That's to everyone, right?
Yeah, it's to everyone. Anyone.
Yeah, okay, because I was wondering no one else. I'm just keeping quiet so someone else can speak.
You're doing that whole if I stay silent, someone else will talk thing. It's a great trick.
I was just thinking about something that resonated with me about when Gabby spoke, is about safety. And I was remembering, I learned quite a lot recently working with Deb Rogers on an urban wilderness commission that was in Hartshill Park. The other thing that just stood out to me was the welcome outsiders. And I was thinking about, what about when the artist is the outsider? So for me, I felt like an outsider in that park, in Hartshill Park. I hadn't even been to it before I did the work. Deb was very familiar with it. So when we worked together, it was like her space that she was sharing with me. And it's a very wild space. I don't know if people know it, but it's in the middle of the city. It feels very wild. You know, while I was there, we saw lots of birds. We saw a jay. We saw, at one point I saw a fox, and also just in terms of the people that use it, maybe people that hang out there. Sometimes we might not see people, but we'd see the aftermath of things that had happened there. So yeah, that I don't know where that fits with the rules, but the safety, the outsider thing of, I felt very safe because I was with Deb and it was her space and she knew it. And also because we were together, I felt safe. But there was a couple of occasions where she was like, oh, I'm going to go now. And it was also the safety around doing something publicly, like we were exploring ritual and performance. And I think being with another person, being with another artist and somebody who was of that space really, felt quite protective. But there was one occasion where she'd gone and it was dusk and I was left there on my own through choice. And it really changed. Like suddenly I felt really scared being there. That was when I saw the fox, because I started exploring this little path and I got really lost, and this fox came and I was like, oh, I'm okay. But it was a really different feeling as well. It was like just me and the trees. And anyway, I'm waffling on really. But yeah.
How did it feel to feel like an outsider in somewhere in your locality almost?
You see, I don't live in Stoke, I live in Stafford as well, although I've worked in Stoke and studied there. Yeah, I was very conscious anyway, being an artist, going into that space, feeling like, whose space is this? You know, what right have we got to be here? And how are people, you know, how are the people that use that space going to feel about us being there? So I was really conscious of that the whole time.
So tell us a little bit about the project.
I feel like I've just waffled on.
So what was it that you were doing? Yeah.
We were doing ritual. We were working with ritual around Samhain, the fire festival, at the end of October. So we were working with the park, the land, and it was also exploring how to make public art during COVID. So it was in October last year. You know, how can we work? And Deb and I normally do participatory art quite a lot. So how could we work in a way that sort of involves people without involving them in a sort of way that we invite? We're very used to inviting people to things, trying to get a crowd. I've done stuff in the past where we've made little things, little objects that people have written on or put somewhere. And we just were exploring how to work without maybe the numbers. So the thing that resonated with me was the demand more than fireworks, because a lot of the time I was really questioning the value of what we were doing. Like, are we just like farting about, you know, indulging ourselves, just lying on leaves? Who's seeing this? You know, we did make lots of videos and stuff, but yeah, like how many people are coming here? Who's seeing us? We dressed up in costumes, so we did stand out quite a bit. So for me, it was like looking for that kind of interruption, that surprise, and, you know, people who might just be walking their dog and see us with these costumes on. Sorry, I feel like I'm just waffling on.
You're not, I promise you.
But
it's
yeah, that really resonated with me, because I think as well it's confidence. It's like, what the hell am I doing? Like, what are we doing? Are we just like really doing, you know, what value has this got to people? But actually, from the feedback that we had on like social media, just putting images of ourselves spending time there, I think it did. And what you said about the email, like seeing every email as a gesture of care. You know, the messages that we were having, like private messages on Facebook of people saying, I'd love to go there, but I'm too scared, you know, and just opening up these conversations and relationships that people have with that place, even if they haven't been to it, and the kind of imagination. And yeah, so it kind of felt very, sensitive work in a way, not fireworks at all. But the safety thing was a definite thing. You know, there was a point where, and I was desperate for the toilet, and, you know, just after what April had said about, you know, and that idea of like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to like have a wee in this public space, you know, and this man had just walked past with his dog, and I was like, oh gosh, you know, but all those things of like, what are people going to think of us? Are we going to get in trouble? Are we going to get attacked? You know, so anyway, I'm just waffling on. I'm going to mute myself to stop it.
Thank you. I really appreciate you sharing those thoughts. So thank you very much. Gabby, I was going to come to you because you mentioned in your keynote about fear, or certainly feeling scared when you were doing your Taking Space project.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing. So walking alone, really, walking alone by yourself, and then full stop as a woman, but then walking alone as a Black woman, then walking alone as a Black woman at a time when it was racially raw. And I experienced lots of people shouting things out, or, you know, or the other thing is lots of people wanting to ask you questions wherever you are, because you are a Black person, to have a conversation about that. So you felt really like, and a lot of other women that I was speaking to were experiencing that. And some of my friends, and I was having conversations in London, who were like, I'm not walking anymore, I'm just staying inside. So that real concern of like, okay, we really do need to walk for our health. It's really important that we keep moving, but equally it's quite a scary thing going out there by yourself. So that was in our heads. But walking with other people, other Black people as well, was important, but a statement, you know. There's a level of security, but equally, I think a lot of people found it very strange. I suppose people were looking at us because we're quite a group of Black women all walking together, and seeing that sight was, I think people found it strange, or just interesting at least, or curious, or, you know, what's happening. But then the other thing that I learned when you said about being in public spaces, and Sam, I have felt also even though I continued walking, and I walked for 100 days after, but even in Hartshill Park, I questioned, especially after the report of the young lady that died, I started kind of questioning myself. And in Hartshill Park in particular is the one place that I actually did turn around and go back to my car. So but one of the things that I learned, or was really having to work in, so before I just worked with poetry and you know, like different voices within poetry, but this project was probably one of the first ones where I had to work with lots of different art forms. And one of the things that was one of the key learnings was about, when I was working in outdoors, was about how I interact with the space. So I was quite familiar with, you know, there's artists that would do something temporarily and then go away, you know, like Goldsworthy and things like that. But then I was really thinking for the dancers about music, and how much that would impose on the space, you know, like how much me deciding what music needs to be played out. And I met a drummer who was out in Henley Park, and he was just saying to me, well, why would you play music? Can't listen to the music that is already here, like listen to the sounds and the rhythms and the, you know, you've got to work within the environment that is here, as opposed to just, you know, come and impose your, you know, what you can do that, but that to be more authentic in it, like really listen in. So I really tried to incorporate that, or like just work with the sounds that were just around me. And when I actually did listen, I could hear them. So that was something really interesting to kind of go, oh yeah, there's already there's already stuff here. I'm not just going to go in. Equally, I have to collaborate with this environment, as opposed to, I have to work with the paths and the whatever's here and the rats. There were rats, and like everything that's here. I have to work with it, as opposed to just bring a rat catcher and put my own music. And so there is a sense of collaborating with the environment as well.
There are some quite big rats in Hanley Park. I have seen them.
We danced around them, we danced with them. So some of those movements were literally a jig away from the rats. So, but yeah.
I guess we're making a community for the rats as well, but everyone's welcome. In some ways, again, you were the outsiders to the rats as well, weren't you?
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, we were.
Yeah, I think collaborating with the environment is really so special, and that's almost something quite unique that working with public art or in public spaces can offer you, because it's really not like renting a space and you go there, you impose something, even though you've bought your service, you're allowed to do that, and then you remove it and leave, and it's a clean slate. And you go there and you kind of really, like you said, you have to listen into the environment, you have to tune into a lot of like intuitions around like, you can almost sometimes feel, if you're in a bigger space, that there's like a little corner or a little patch that kind of like doesn't want you there, or you shouldn't really go there, or it should kind of be left alone, and kind of having to intuit what those spaces are feels quite interesting, I think. And I really related as well to Sam when you spoke about being in costume and people being kind of like weirded out, because that definitely happened on my latest shoot as well. And at first you're just a little bit like, or I felt a bit like shy and intimidated, and I was like, oh, like people maybe just want to take their walks undisturbed. And then I was like, no, but I also just want to make my film undisturbed, and we are allowed to be here and use the space to like create our own worlds, just as they are if they want to walk their dog and have that be part of their everyday world. And it's very easy, and should be very easy, for these two to coexist. But yeah, I really understand the kind of like, if I want to be here, can I? Wait, I can. Okay, I'm going to, but I'm also going to listen to the space. So I'm here respectfully. This kind of conversation, I guess.
Yeah,
the environment.
I think I'm just going to quickly say, April, that one of the other projects that I did, I realized the importance of like those spaces where lots of different things happen. So like, I think the thing about outdoor spaces, it's layered. So lots of people use it for different uses. And that's really interesting.
Fabulous. So we've had the message that we're wrapping up, so we can go back to the main room. Thank you everybody for your contributions. I hope you've all found it useful. I found it really interesting, really, really good, and I appreciate your time today. Thank you to April and to Gabriella as well for sharing experiences. And Sam, I loved the Hartshill Park project. I was watching it from afar last year. So we will go back to the main rooms.
Okay, thank you, Charlotte, for hosting.
Oh, you're welcome.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Streetscape session. My name's Nick Winstanley. I'm going to be your host for this session, and I'm going to be talking briefly to Joyce Iwaszko, who is a visual artist and director of Dust Rising. Before we do that, I'm just going to give you a little quick introduction to me. I've been working in public art for about 13 years now. Started in collaboration with another artist called Sarah Naden, who I worked with for approximately 7 years. We started our career doing permanent municipal sculpture and 2D public art, sort of in the context of the end of the private finance initiative and the Building Schools for the Future programme that happened in the late 2000s, and made a personal decision to move into more liminal practices, so walking practices, and looking more widely at the effects of art and the necessity of art in society. So before we have a chat with Joyce Iwaszko, and then we'll open up the room for further discussion and open it up to the floor to talk about the Public Art Now provocations. We're going to play a video of Dust Rising's most recent happening or project that happened in 2020, and it's called Every Other Seat. So if we can play that video now, that would be great. Thank you.
So,
sorry, everyone. I'm not sure if it's
Pete's supposed to be sorting it.
Is Pete supposed to be here to do that for us?
I think so. It was sent to him.
Okie doke. Just give it a little second just to see if we can sort that out. Okay. Perhaps we can do just a quick introduction to Dust Rising as an organisation, and hope Pete can come in and show us the video before we talk a little bit about that project. So Joyce, yeah, tell us a little bit about Dust Rising to start us off.
Right. Just an introduce myself. Obviously, I'm Joyce. I'm Iwaszko. I'm an artist and one of the founder directors of Dust Rising CIC. We started the Dust series of exhibitions back in 2016-17, and they were a response to the UK Stoke-on-Trent bid for City of Culture 2021, which we're currently in. And what we did was myself with Andy Cook got together and we put 6 exhibitions across the 6 towns of Stoke-on-Trent, showing off visual arts and multimedia, mixed media artworks. That was in response to the colours based on the marketing material, and also is associated with the towns of Stoke-on-Trent. That was to try and promote the area and give artists the opportunity to show work, make work, and show off their work. So I'm just reading what it says there. So Dust Rising is a CIC. We would aim to encourage audiences and artists to experience high quality visual arts, inspire and encourage artists to make exhibition work and show it in Stoke-on-Trent and the surrounding areas. We became a CIC in 2019, and we've done several exhibitions since then. We did DR19 in the Old Spode factory in Stoke itself. And we tend to show artworks in non-traditional spaces, so not the traditional gallery spaces, but we'll go into different sorts of spaces, and that would bring us on to Every Other Seat.
Fantastic, thanks Joyce. So I think we've got the video lined up now for us to sort of create a context for our discussion.
Great, thanks.
About displacement, and this displacement that's been caused by the corona pandemic, and the displacement that was caused by during lockdown, where the physical experience of culture, theatre, cinema and retail as well, it's about that kind of displacement.
Being with it over the last 2 days, it's also made me think about how much I'm carrying and the weight of what's happening, I suppose, to the arts. It's like quite literal for me, thinking, you know, this is quite a big thing to be carrying with us.
It was just really exciting to work on a project that involved a lot of other artists from Stoke and working and engaging with the community for such an important cause as well.
This has been such an important project. The idea of not only being able to kind of repurpose the idea of found materials, found objects like the chair, it's the idea of being able to create awareness surrounding COVID and how COVID is kind of affecting the arts and the theatre.
We've got a DJ, and when I see people, kids and people walking past, they're doing a bit of dance moves, it puts a smile on people's faces, and which is a really good thing. This is a tough time for people, basically. So I'm very hopeful and positive about the future of Hanley, really.
Fantastic. Great, Joyce. Thanks for that. I hope you all enjoyed that video. I just wanted to ask you, Joyce, I mean, there's a lot of, explanation in the video about the reasons for that, for that intervention, but I just wanted to ask you personally, so why this project at this time and in this place?
Right. Well, the project initially came from a discussion that we had as we have associate artists, there's 7 of us, and we get together, and it was just at the beginning of lockdown, and we were on a Zoom meeting, had a discussion. We particularly wanted to continue to make artwork, and through the discussion, the idea of every other seat came about, and that references, as you've just seen, and it was quite somber actually. I wasn't expecting my reaction, my emotional reaction to that. Haven't seen it for a while, but at the time before the artworks were made, we'd just about gone into lockdown at that point, and artists wanted to create something and just be part of a group, really. We decided to think about the effects of COVID-19, obviously on the closing of the theatres, everything stopped, and how artists might have a response to that. Just to mention that Dust Rising CIC is an artist-led CIC. We have 2 other directors, Terry Shave and Cornelia Herms, as well as the associate artists. And we all wanted to get together and make some seats to reference the theatre and how artists were going to respond to that. So the project really was set up from there, really, and it relates to the seat that's empty next to the seat that might have been where you somebody might have sat. The artists were all asked to come up with their own responses to that. So the seats were either made from scratch, where most people used recycled materials of some sort. They could be recycled, repurposed, customized, or embellished. So there was no. It was very, very. The artists weren't given any particular sort of stipulation, except there had to be a certain size, a certain height, a certain depth, certain weight. Unfortunately, some people did go over that slightly, unfortunately, and part of the exhibition was to walk with the seats about that displacement, because we had been, previous to that, artists were able to sit in theatres and watch shows and watch music and performance. and then at this point, obviously that all stopped. So that displacement of people having to go into their own houses and watch TV, watch shows from Zoom, that sort of thing. So that's really how the project came about. We then looked for funding. It's worth saying that the artists who initially took part in the first exhibition in Piccadilly all agreed to make the seats prior to having any funding, which we wouldn't recommend. But we did manage to get some funding thankfully from Stoke-on-Trent City Council and Stoke-on-Trent City Centre bid. And that was obviously then we decided to go to the Piccadilly area. So the seats just were reference to the artists, the arts, the theatre, but also that symbolic of that loss. And it was after that we had the real big loss of people from the death of COVID, which was awful. So that was the Piccadilly exhibition, and that was the streetscape that we put on. It was the first show in Stoke-on-Trent to happen after lockdown. So we made the seats, the artists made the seats, 15 initially were commissioned, and then we sorry, I've lost my train of thought there. We went obviously and set them in the Piccadilly area. The reason for using Piccadilly for the seats was because we walked out of the Regent Theatre, and performance was part of that as well. So it was that displacement. So the seats, as you've just seen, walked out from the Regent Theatre onto the street and then lined down the street. We weren't allowed to advertise due to COVID, so it was a very strange, we went from always being able to have to advertise everything on social media to having no advertisement at all. But it was the people who, we obviously we did tell some people that we might be there, and it was the people walking about and walking up and down Piccadilly, and the feedback was lovely. At that point, people hadn't been out of their houses. They were allowed to go out, but not to meet in any more than 6. It was the rule of 6 at that time. So we thought that was very successful. We had the video made, and it was a beautiful sunny day. It seems like ages ago now. I don't know if I'm rattling on too much.
No, that's great. It very much sort of brings back memories for me personally, as myself and my creative partner at the time, Sarah Nadin, did a residency on Piccadilly in 2015, where we were there situated on the street for 6 months. And like you say, without much advertising, we were just placing things in the space and allowing people to experience them. And it brings me on to the point of, in the public art now, rules for public art, and situations rules for public art. And one of the ones I was looking at, which is number 7, don't embellish, interrupt. And that's something that that signified quite a big shift in my practice when I went from doing permanent sculptural 2D public art into more liminal practices, is the idea that, well, I started to sort of think of my practice and think of streetscapes as a sort of portal into the mindset of the people that use them. That's how it sort of came across to me. And as we have situations now where our streetscapes can become quite homogenized and quite commercialized, and at the other end of the scale they can become quite dilapidated and fractured spaces, and it always occurred to me that the way that people felt in them really was represented by the way that they were, and that as artists we have this opportunity to interrupt those mindsets and hopefully open up people's minds to think about these spaces in different ways. I wondered if that resonated with you at all, or if there's another one of the provocations that you think resonate with your project.
Yeah, I mean, just to sort of, I'll just go back slightly if I can, just to the Newcastle under Lyme exhibition as well, because we did the Piccadilly streetscape where we lined the seats and did the walk at Piccadilly. A few months later, into the second lockdown, we managed to get some funding from Newcastle under Lyme bid and Appetite, and put an exhibition. We added more seats to that. We added Newcastle College, some students did some work, and Regent College did some work. And just as we were about to exhibit that work, the second lockdown came, and we had to find another way of showing these artworks, another 7 commissions as well. And that was when we went into the shop fronts. And thinking about what you've just said about shop fronts and, you know, sort of the streetscape, we had to find a way of showing the artwork that wasn't necessarily outside at that point, but was then inside as well. And just to think about the don't embellish, interrupt, which I thought about quite a bit, and it was quite a nice one for every other seat, because some of the artist responses did interrupt the whole everything, you know, from the COVID-19 to the theatre to their own personal responses. But also equally, some of the artists embellished the seats, so they made them quite forward thinking and made them quite decorative and embellished. So my little challenge to that would be, can we be both? So there would be embellish and interrupt, or any combination of those. I don't think that really, I think that's one of the provocations I would pick up on, like you say. For me, it's a combination of those two things, and they could either be one or the other or together.
Fantastic. I think
sorry, just one last little bit.
Yeah, go for it.
The other one, another point was, don't waste, it was number 10, don't waste time on definitions. Is it sculpture, is it visual art? I think, and one of the questions is, does it move you? And for me, that's, you know, as a director of Dust Rising and as an artist, that's what the artwork should do. And I think when we showed both Every Other Seats, you know, we hoped it would move people or make them curious, create an emotion or memory, and for us that's what it's about, really. So
thank you very much, Joyce. That's great, and I hope that's food for thought for everyone, because I'd like to open up the floor now for your contributions to this discussion, or to talk about any of the other provocations. I can share that on the screen if anyone would like to see them again. But if you would like to talk, just unmute yourself. There's enough of us in this room, I think, that we can handle random unmuting. So please, someone kick us off for a bit of discussion.
Nice to see everyone, actually. I know a few faces that are on that list, and some people I don't know. So
okay, don't be shy, guys.
No questions.
Go for it,
oh,
Anne. It's all right. Go, Anne's got one.
Anne got one. Oh, good.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Thank you, Anne.
No, it was just to add to the embellishing and interrupt, because I think we did a project down in Stoke, which was around greening, and I don't know if people know Church Street in Stoke. Can be pretty dismal, and so we upcycled objects and planted wildflowers in them. And I think the one that worked in a way really nice, we did a vertical handbag wall, and that definitely made people go, what is it? And but also it was quite decorative as well. I don't know, there was something about, we got a lot of responses to that, kind of putting something a bit unusual in a space, but also and nearly tripping people up in some cases, but making them stop and then ask questions about it. So I think there is a bit of both. I agree with you, Joyce, there's a bit of both.
Oh, thank you, Anne. Yeah, and that was actually one I'd got that on my list to mention, actually, so I'm glad you said that. People will think that was planned, but it wasn't. Because Greenie Stoke and the you know, the colour that you brought into the area was wonderful. So it was one of the ones that, you know, I've got a few here that I thought I might mention, and actually Greenie Stoke was one of them. A couple of other ones, thinking about colour and a very big sort of public art installation. I don't know if people have seen Liz West's Hundreds and Thousands, 2021 at Greenwich Peninsula, London, and it's light glass, and it's a stunning piece of work. So thinking about the use of colour, that was my thought, and embellish, really, those two things. And in contrast to that, the interrupt ones that I sort of picked out were Rachel White Reed's house, If people know that from 1993-94, if people aren't aware of it, please have a look. So where she interrupted the space, a very big installation. And also when the shipping container came to Stoke-on-Trent in 2019, the Jimmy Coady estate. And again, it's that communication and interruption into the streetscape that all those, you know, from the very small interventions to the much bigger ones that I think are really interesting.
Fantastic. Alison, have you got something to contribute?
Yeah, I can't remember all the provocations because I don't have it in front. I didn't write them down.
I can share my screen. There we are.
But the one that immediately came to mind was the one about to be about that. It doesn't have to look like public art, and it's not forever. I thought was really important. Quite some, and I'm wondering if it's quite. I'm afraid my involvement in public art goes back some 20 years when I worked for Sustrans, and I was working to commission work for the millennial funded cycle routes. And I was also a research fellow at Nottingham Trent University. And what we were trying to do, we were trying the impossible, actually, as it turns out, because the funding was for capital. It was we were trying to not make permanent work. We were trying to make work with artists in a different kind of way, so that there was impermanence was part of it. And the only way in the end, the only way I managed to get around that was to when working with Stefan Jack in Derby, was to build around the final permanent piece, which Sustrans were willing to fund, a kind of open day at the Derby Roundhouse. So the artists had taken some, sorry, I don't want to go on too long because we haven't got a lot.
No, go for it.
The artist, Stefan Jack, had recast. So he's an artist who was very much interested in imbuing history and people, communities' history in the work that he made. So he found these columns in the Derby Roundhouse, which had been a big employer at one point, and recast them using some railway lines that had been disused, and replaced. Sorry, I'm losing my track. And we cited them along the River Derwent, and we'd cited one of them in particular in a place where it was likely that the river would rise and cover them up. So so kind of hiding them. So yes, they were permanent, but kind of finding a way of these being embedded and impermanent, or changing their character. So, and many years later, when I went to look back at the work, one of the ones that had been cited on the lower bank was now almost completely disappeared and silted up. And it was absolutely fitted really well, now that I think about it, with Stefan's aim for the work to be impermanent and to be taken, returned to, hidden, or returned to, and around that he did an open day at the Roundhouse, inviting, and we were kind of, hundreds of people came to see the work within the Roundhouse before it was cited, and had an experience of, had an opportunity to revisit a place that had been closed for some time at that point.
It's really interesting. Sorry.
Yes, no, that it just occurred to me that hopefully nowadays it is easier to do that.
What I thought is really interesting about that is considering permanent work impermanent, because in the end of the day, it all is. I know I've done public art pieces that are stainless steel and big and will be there longer after I'm gone, perhaps. But it brings to mind the Edward Colston statue. It'd been there for 100 years, perhaps. overlooked by most people because it had become part of the accustomed streetscape. But it came back into relevance, and then people began to engage with it in the ways that were relevant for the day, and it became impermanent after a long time of being irrelevant. And so that, I think that's very interesting when we think about our streetscapes too, is that, like you say, things that may appear permanent never really are. Anyone else anyone else want to pick up on that discussion or give us a new contribution? Okay. Well, oh, go on, Hilary. Fantastic.
Sorry, this one of the provocations there that I went, I don't think I know what this means. So I want to know whether anybody else knows what it means. I think I've got an idea, but it's the cultural arms race. And I'm going, so what do we think? What's that?
Laurel, would you like to have a stab at that one?
Hi, Hilary.
Hi.
Can you everybody hear me? Yeah, right. So I think, well, position that with I think. I think it's in terms of bigger is better. So I think it's, and I think a lot of these come back to demands of funders, don't they? So people are saying the reason that funders want to invest in capital rather than time. And also, if you've done an event one year, then the next year to get funding, it needs to be bigger and it needs to be better. And that kind of the scale. So I think that's what it's talking about. And I think maybe also it's talking about competition between arts organisations, trying to outdo each other. And I think it's suggesting that you know, I think we're very lucky in Stoke-on-Trent that I don't think that happens. We don't feel so much in a cultural arms race, but I imagine in other places maybe that is more the case.
Yeah, maybe that feels like more like it if you're in a bigger city. But I think, I think it can feel. I think there is something about where cultural organisations place themselves, and also where people, there is a big push to work in partnership, which people shouldn't be scared of, and I think that's an interesting thing that we all have to think about. You know, how do we set up those partnerships, and how can they last, and how can we really make those partnerships look at those other parts of the manifesto?
I think that's really interesting idea to put in there, isn't it? Yeah, it is a lot of pressure. If anybody wants to access the big pots of funding,
yes,
then it's a requirement, isn't it? There has to be, which I suppose is possibly as well where, you know, we're part of this idea about us presenting this idea, this provocation of a new rules for public art is recognising that need for as arts organisations in a small city, if we want to bring in bigger amounts of funding, being able to justify that by being part of something wider.
Absolutely.
There's a point I wanted to make on that, from my own experience of being recipient of a large amount of money for a permanent public piece of sculpture. We our commission for the On Earth sculpture in Stoke-on-Trent was £100,000. It was probably 10 times more than we as an organisation had ever been handling before. The vast majority of that money was spent on the physical object of the sculpture, but the value was in the project, the year-long project that we did, and engaged around 9,000, well, up to 15,000 people, we think, over a year in the development of that sculpture. And that, for me, was the turning point in my career where I decided that these big money sculptural streetscape pieces were erroneous, not necessary. It was the project that happened, the collaboration, the partnerships, all of that was the value. And so that's why I stripped my practice back to something that demanded less money, less material outlay, less of the capital that funders like to focus on. But I felt that the temporary interventions, the conversations that came from that, but then the sustained conversations that happened in the streetscapes were of much more value for what we wanted to achieve, which was to create connections between people and to represent those connections in the public space. It didn't need all of that money.
I'm just having a look actually through the rules, and you get the feeling that they are trying to encourage people to take part. There's no, by taking the constraints away, there's no defined look of what it should be as public art. You don't necessarily need to be a professional artist because it's not forever, so there's not that pressure there to create this massive wonderful masterpiece that's going to be admired. It's more about the process and the project and the community that forms around it, and the whole doing of it is more important than actually leaving behind a massive sculptural statue.
Absolutely. Yes, I totally agree, and I think Anna Berry's presentation is testament to that. She told us that she didn't even consider herself an artist and just did these interventions and has managed to sort of build a practice by that very thing you're talking about, the impermanence of her work. Yeah, really great contribution.
Yeah, really, really inspiring to see someone that would just gone ahead and done it and used found low-cost material to create this absolutely amazing, wonderful pieces of artwork that just generated so much conversation and discussion and just were beautiful to look at. So yeah, that was amazing to see that.
Absolutely. Fantastic. We've got a few minutes left in the session now. Joyce, is there anything else you would like to come in and discuss on the topics we've talked about? Oh, you're muted.
Just to say, can you hear me now?
Yep, can hear you.
Yeah. Just to say thank you to Urban Wilderness, because to set this up, they're a new CIC in the area, as are we, and I think that we talked about, and Hilary mentioned about the sort of the partnerships. I think it's building those partnerships across the newer organisations that are happening, as well as the more established organisations, and it's trying to get people together, and not only the NPOs and the very big organisations. I think from the legacy of every other seat, that we would like to take part in bigger bigger sort of installations or exhibitions maybe in the future, but as part of that legacy. But it's just trying to keep those open channels with the bigger organisations as well, with the smaller ones. So I think we're quite a small community, so everybody tends to know each other as well. So which is really good. So I think it's trying to use that to our advantage. That's what I'd like to happen, really. So
fantastic.
Thank you.
We've got 2 minutes left in the breakout room, I've just been told. So I just perhaps we could, if anyone's got anything else to contribute on the Public Art Now provocations, then now's your time. Go on, Hilary.
On the permanence and impermanence thing is really interesting, because I've got two thoughts on that. We did a project with Robert Montgomery and putting large text on buildings, and we wanted it to not be permanent because, well, for lots of reasons, but we did want it to be not permanent, and that caused quite a stir, because the paint we used was able to wash away, and then people hated it when it started to wash away, which is really interesting.
Oh.
And because, well, some were sad, emotionally sad, because the text was going. Others thought it was not well done, and we had quite a lot of stern criticism about the quality of the artist and the paint. So that's interesting. But we also put a piece on our own building, which is permanent. And that's an interesting contrast for us. And actually, the permanent piece on our building has been so useful because people now know where we are. They go, "Oh, that Wild Sky building." It's just a funny reference point. And the thing that nobody's talked about is Carnival in the streetscape.
Hi everyone, I'm just gonna check that everyone's here.
Okay. Which room is this?
This is the installation room, room 3.
Oh, maybe I've been put in here. I think I was in green spaces, but that's okay. I'm fine. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Steph.
I guess installations is a good one for the current thing.
So when should we make a start? Is there going to be like a sign when everyone's here?
I think we've just all been put in the room, so this is probably...
Okay then, so yeah, we'll start then, why not? So yes, we've got some rules for public art, a lot of rules, and I've picked 2 which I feel we could discuss a bit more of, or if you have some ones that you do like one of the rules, just let me know. So one of the rules that I really liked was don't waste time on definitions, just in relation to my practice as a filmmaker. So I feel like with visuals, you do try and put a lot of definitions as to what. But myself, but yes, myself, I do believe it's time as an artist to stop defining everything, and just let people take away the meanings that we have themselves. So I really liked Anna Berry's work, especially the breathing room. That was really good, especially the kinetic theme and making it breathe. So hopefully we can get a bit more sort of opinions and views from Anna Berry, and just let us know like what our process was when thinking about creating these art pieces, and whether you feel like people inspire your art pieces, or do you think it's more driven within yourself?
Oh, I wasn't expecting questions.
Oh.
That's okay. I don't know, I think I'm quite a selfish artist. I pretty much decide what I want to do and do it without too much consideration of other people. But the reason that I think that's kind of okay and not too tyrannical is that everything I do is like super temporary. So I'm not kind of swooping in and sort of shoving things in public space that people have to live with forever and they're unconnected with and all of that stuff. It's like a little change in a moment in time. So kind of feels okay. Like, yeah, I think the definitions thing is really important. I remember when showing the first breathing room, there was this guy came in and he was telling me, it's not art, this isn't art. And I was like, oh, okay then, like, what do you think art is? And he had this like really, really specific idea that art had to be paintings, and it had to be paintings of landscapes, and ideally it would have a windmill in it. So for him, that's what art was. And the thing is, it didn't bother me at all because he really liked it. He liked being in the space and he liked the piece. He just didn't define it as art. And so I thought, well, that's just semantics, isn't it? It don't matter. So yeah, I definitely liked the rule about it's not forever and the rule about don't waste time on definitions.
Yeah, I picked Not Forever as well. I think the material is quite interesting. I think once you start, if you get asked to make, I guess, a public piece of artwork that's forever, then you're really kind of, I guess, thinking about materials that do last forever. Whereas I think if it's not forever, or it's a temporary piece, I think you can be a lot more freer and respond to a space better, because I think you're kind of less restricted that way.
I think it's like a huge and terrifying responsibility, the idea of sort of putting in these great kind of quite monolithic pieces that then stick around for a long time. And I think I'd tie myself the knots a bit if I had to do one of them.
Yeah, I guess in Ellie's and Gabriella's work, they kind of responding to time as well, which is something I'm going to pick up on my presentation. But and I think, whereas if it's forever and someone's made a piece of work that is forever, it's kind of stuck in that moment in time. And as time, I guess, progresses, I guess that sometimes changes the meaning of how you kind of see, I guess, a piece of public art that's been kind of stuck there, and how, I guess, the change in space around it affects the reading of the work, I guess, which is kind of quite interesting.
It's not forever. I think I did some work for Tomorrowland, which was a project for Bearts, and for that I projected some visuals through a tunnel in a park. And even though it was just for one night, for one moment to get it all filmed for an online viewing, it still felt really nice to have a piece that was kind of just could be interpreted in that time, and people could take away those messages. Because if you do have things that last forever, obviously every day that piece that you make changes its meaning, and at times it can also then lose its meaning as well, and you kind of wonder why you did the project. So yeah, things not sticking around forever is also like a good rule. Keeps variety in play as well. Does anyone else have any comments on the rules at all? Would you like me to share them, just so you've got a reminder?
Well, for me, I think it's also interesting exploring this idea of decomposition, or something that is temporary, slowly disintegrating in the space, because I think there's quite a lot to explore there, and I think that it's often quite an unwelcome process visually, which is also interesting to explore. I remember there's this story about an Anthony Gormley sculpture here in Stoke, which was I think decommissioned by the council because it wasn't made from a durable material. So it slowly started eroding, and it just wasn't a pleasing sight. And I think that is just this aesthetic of the composition can become something really interesting if it's explored properly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's in the Garden Festival site, isn't it? It was.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it still is, but Anna Francis knows a lot about that. So if you wanted to find out more about that specific piece, but I think you're right. I think well, in my case, I make work that's kind of, and that was one of my questions to Anna, listening to her presentation, was how she kind of, which comes first? Does she kind of respond to the space, or does she have an artwork in mind and then find the space? So I think it's quite important, the framing of the artwork, or I guess the landscape, and how that can be used as a framing piece for the artwork. So my question to Anna was, which does she pick first, and how does she feel the difference of how people respond to her work indoors and outdoors from the gallery setting, especially with a new piece, the Breathing piece, which is now taken out of the gallery context and going to be shown outside.
Yeah, I mean, Breathing Room was never in a gallery context. It was in like shopping centres and stuff like that. So So it's not that changed, but it is interesting that people are still quite reverent of it. You know, like usually you find stuff in gallery space has that kind of sacrosanct, you don't touch thing that people pick up on, and then art in public space is just like a climbing frame or whatever, like people kind of own it. And I like that really. I like, you know, I wish I sort of did make more robust things that people could just like properly own kind of thing. But actually when it's been out in public space, people are really respectful. There isn't like loads of kids like tugging at it or anything like that. It's been really surprising. In my early kind of start, it was always about building stuff in the place. Like usually a lot of what I built, I would come with some pre-made stuff, like it's a modular structure, but essentially it'd have to be kind of built in situ. And so it becomes a conversation really between the sort of the materials and the space. It's quite an organic thing. I think Kerry had her hand up, but I don't know if anyone saw. She wanted to say something.
Oh, thanks. Sorry, I'm having some problems with my sound. It was back to the earlier point, actually, about moments and things degrading in space. I work on moments, really, I suppose. Partly I am interested in kind of sculpting time, but also in terms of what other people were saying. You know, it's a huge responsibility, and perhaps one you might not necessarily be comfortable having, given that time and communities are constantly changing, to kind of create an artwork that will last, you know, for a very long time. So it's good to have these momentary interventions. But and I did have some discussions with an art architect about making things in collaboration with Urban Wilderness, perhaps one day, with out of biodegradable, more plastic type material. So the whole point is that they would kind of degrade over time. That's all I was going to say, but thank you.
So the other point that I kind of also thought would be good to touch on was the don't embellish, interpret. Just because I do believe that with the art that you do produce for the communities that you're surrounded by, can come with a little bit of, oh, should I talk about this, or should I like touch on subjects around that are quite popular or within media. So back to the point I'm trying to make, when you interpret, when you leave your idea to be interpreted, or when you interpret the idea in a different way, I think it opens yourself up to being able to express a lot more. And I think not embellishing the truth and kind of projecting it is a bit better. But I don't know if anybody else has any other points regarding the rules. Did somebody say they did want me to share it? I feel like somebody did nod their head when they said they wanted me to share the screen and show the presentation, the PowerPoint. So let's get on that.
So please ask a question while you're doing that, if it's not too distracting. So I was just wondering, because I think there's a really interesting, talk you could have around here about what you mean exactly by embellish. I mean, do you mean not conceal or like smooth over the more difficult aspects that might exist within a participatory, piece of work or public art? Like making it easier for viewers in a way, more palatable.
Yes. So yes, in the terms of concealing, maybe your real views or maybe your real thoughts about situations that are happening and how that kind of makes the art that you're making as well. So with a lot of like media and visual, you always know there's some kind of hidden truth behind what they're projecting. If you watch a documentary, you get one side of the story, but you can never be too sure if that's the right side of the story. And thinking with that within public art, sometimes you ask if what they've done is enough, or if what they've done really truly advocates the themes and issues that are going on within the world. So for me, an example would be I don't know if anyone saw it, the Knife Angel. It did go around like the UK, and I saw it in Birmingham, and somebody had collected knives from his community and youth and people around him and made a massive angel out of all the knives he collected. It was beautiful to see, but again, it had me questioning was that enough to kind of make people think about knife crime and how that affects their community. And so that's where I was trying to go with the whole don't embellish, interpret point. I also like the idea as well of get lost, just kind of getting lost within the spaces that the artist created. So I think David Bethell's going into that with Anna as well, just kind of how you look at spaces and interpret that into the idea as well. Does anyone use or think about the spaces that their art will be in?
I guess with my work, I'm always, my work's quite site specific and I respond to a lot of the history within a site and how I guess I can interpret that history with my sculptures. I kind of, yeah, so I guess I want to kind of, by kind of making sculptures that respond to the site specific and that history of the space, when people hopefully see my work kind of framed within that kind of space or the landscape, then maybe that'll trigger something in the viewer to kind of think, well, why has he made that and what is that relationship? And maybe they will then research into the history of that kind of space. So I guess it's kind of nods towards what has happened within, I guess, the landscape or a space. Yeah, and kind of framing it that way for me. But also, I'm quite a kind of fell runner as well. So I kind of a lot of the time I enjoy going out in I guess in the landscape and running and stuff, and then getting lost that way, and then either coming across trying to find pieces of artwork that have been made in specific places, but also kind of thinking about my work in relationship to a kind of a particular route or a space. So for instance, a piece that I did, which was in search of George Cartledge, which is a painting at the Potteries Museum, was painted near the Roaches and the Black Forest. So I kind of spent about 3 runs running around like the woodland and the Roaches area, just trying to find where the perspective from that painting, and then kind of reframe that into a new piece of work, basically. Yeah, I hope that kind of answers that question from my perspective.
Yeah, that was brilliant, thank you. So what do we think about these new rules for public art then? Do you think they stand? Are they good in helping us as artists create work and think about our next projects, or is there something that you would change within the rules?
Can I just ask what people think about the cultural arms race? Excuse me. Sorry. What do people take from that? Because I'm a little bit, I'm quite sure about that one.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I wasn't sure if it was like of cities competing for I guess pots of funding or money and trying to outdo each other.
Yeah.
Or like, I guess maybe within, because I'm from Stoke, maybe it was, and I come from, I guess, a background where I set up airspace galleries, so I've got a little bit of understanding of, I guess, how they divvy up money within the city. And because Stoke's made up of different towns, they were always fighting over a certain pot of money to or funding to give out to people, and then kind of, but they could never agree, so nothing really kind of got done. And I'm wondering, that's probably the same with, I guess, with the City of Culture. It's kind of happening here, so you get kind of pockets of culture developing in different cities. I'm not sure, and then competing with each other, and maybe they don't need to because it's just like a hit of culture and then it's gone. A bit like, I guess, plonking public art. But I don't know if that's kind of what I thought it was, but I'm not.
That makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah.
I've got the description here of on the Situations website, and it's more about asking people to kind of break away from the sort of monoculture clone town attitude of, I guess, creating high streets that just mirror each other, and to encourage individuality and unexpected. And do you want me to read it out?
Is that breaking away from maybe, I guess, steel sculptures then, in terms of public artwork? And because every kind of town and city tends to have a steel sculpture on a roundabout.
It says towns and cities across the world are locked into a one-size-fits-all style of public art. In a culture of globalized brands and clone towns, we hanker after authentic, distinctive places. If we are placemaking, let's make unusual places.
Ah.
Yeah, it's interesting, I think.
Very interesting.
It comes from a lot of
would be to break away from the steel sculptures and kind of, I guess maybe then reply to follow rule 3, maybe, where, for example, where you can create your own community and use the community to make a public building or a piece of work, like the lullaby piece that Ellie did, or what Anna's doing with the Portland Inn project. So I guess it's kind of steering away from, I guess, the conventional way of commissioning artists from a city council, and then moving towards other ways of kind of commissioning an artist to produce a piece of public art. I imagine.
I think it relates to the fourth one as well, create space for the unplanned. I think that's not, you don't see that enough, kind of just allowing space for something to happen.
Yeah, I think that was really good with Anna's work as well, where people could stumble across a piece of artwork. I think for the commission that I did with the rock piece for the Wasteland project for Urban Wilderness was kind of placed in a woodland, and it's not it's quite hard to find, I guess. And when I was kind of, I guess, just listening to feedback from viewers it was kind of great just to hear that people would just stumble across a bit of public art that they didn't even know that was there. And then kind of, I guess, after a bit more time, people were kind of going to visit the rock that I made. And one person even kind of set his challenge because he broke his foot just to kind of make it to the pool and have a look at the work. And I think it's quite nice because that element of surprise, that you're not expected to see something. So I guess you kind of, which is different to when you walk into a gallery space. I think you kind of expect to see a piece of artwork, and you expect, I guess, where you're thinking about what you're going to feel and what you're going to think and what you're going to kind of think about what the artist is trying to say. Whereas if you kind of stumble across something, you don't have that notion of maybe some preconceived ideas of what could be in a gallery space. So you kind of responding it to the there and now, which is, I think, quite interesting. Maybe a bit more sort of I guess a bit more natural, maybe. That's the right word.
I think that's going with sharing ownership freely as well, but authorship wisely. What do you think about your work being like interactive with installations and having audiences feel and be immersed with what you've created and kind of having their own ownership over it? Kind of like when somebody has a canvas and they ask people to just do whatever they want to the canvas. They then in themselves kind of own that art, but it's also the artists who came up with the idea. They have authorship over that entirely. Does anyone feel like they kind of need that within their work for installations?
I guess, I mean, if you can unshare your screen, and then Cynthia, then I'll kind of get up my PowerPoint presentation. It'll just, so if I go to, okay, you need to be able to, so I can share my screen. I think you've disabled it, so I can't share.
Oh.
But within my work, I've come from the background of making earlier works that were kind of just seen and filmed by me or people that kind of stumbled across them. And then a bit more recently, I've two pieces I made for the public to see. So I guess, I mean, I kind of didn't want people to see the work initially because I was filming them, so I didn't want them to get in the kind of framework of the filming. But the later work, especially with the rock piece and a piece that I did called Inverted Landscape, which was a kind of church in, I'll just try again. No, it's still not working. Doesn't matter. So for me, it was I've kind of come from the background of exploring the relationship between site-specific, the artist, and the landscape, and how they kind of, I guess, interact with each other from now with the new piece, which is The Weight of Things, for the rock piece that I commissioned, literally being for the viewer to see. So I was kind of, and because this commission for me was in the pandemic, and it was a way of me learning new skills and learning how to sculpt. So I got Mally Mallitson to help me to learn. He's a really good sculptor, to help me understand and making a fiberglass piece of artwork. And I also worked with Ross Ankus, who's an architect, which enabled me to produce a piece of work that the rock that would sit in a pool. So people will see it, and it is a temporary piece of work that has been in the pool for almost a year, I think now. Whereas my previous work was like with, it's quite hard to do this without my slides, but without my wooden pieces were temporary pieces that would kind of fail and break apart during the performance. They were only ever seen by, I guess, people that would stumble across them when I was filming the work. Whereas now, I feel like with especially the rock people, the rock piece, I think people have more, I guess, ownership with that work, because it kind of, well, I've got really good feedback from it, but also because, I guess, like you were saying, they stumbled across it before. Yeah, I still can't post it. I still can't share for some reason. Yeah, so they kind of stumbled across it, and I think they kind of, because it is like a magical piece and it's not, they weren't expecting it. It's kind of yeah, so I guess it was a different way for me of working. I'm going to start wittering on. Yeah, I still can't do it. So.
Can you set permissions in
it just
Zoom?
Screen host disabled attendee to screen sharing. That's, and I
If
can't.
you go to the participants, you should be able to change the permissions to make you a presenter. Dave, that piece, the floating rock, it's really mystical. I think it just. Did you get feedback from people who kind of stumbled across it and were just really moved by it?
Yeah, I kind of people have just been messaging me on Instagram and Facebook and well, the social media, just saying how much they kind of liked it. And I've had people just taking photographs of it and stuff. So it's been quite good. I think because I kind of made the work in relationship. I guess I came out of hospital at the same time as COVID hit, because I had a brain hemorrhage and I couldn't kind of walk for about three months. So I was wondering what I could do to make that piece of work. Well, make a piece of work if I could make work again, really, and also if I'd be able to run again. And I wanted to make a piece of work that responded to, I guess, my kind of influence from my early age of my artwork, which one piece was by Rembrandt, which is called Clear Ideas, which is the painting of the rock floating above the seascape. And at the time, ironically enough, during COVID, the media weren't very clear at all about their kind of what they wanted people to do and their restrictions and stuff like that. So it was very unclear messages. So I kind of then wanted to make a piece of this rock to learn about, well, responding, I guess, to COVID, but also to respond to, I guess, my homage of the landscape and people getting out and about and finding a secret space where people were kind of, I guess, walking and finding a safe place during that time when everyone kind of felt a bit trapped. So I guess, I mean, you could always go onto my website if you wanted through your screen, Cynthia, maybe.
David, do you want to just check and see if you can do it now?
No. It's okay. But yeah, so it's kind of, I guess with that piece, I wanted to kind of, I hope people would get a feeling of what had happened during, I guess, COVID. So they'd either have that feeling of hope or despair. And I kind of wanted to have that kind of mixed feeling within the piece of work, basically. And I guess when that one chap did email me to say that he was kind of looking to walk there because he couldn't walk because he broke his leg or foot to get there, that was really quite nice. And then when I've kind of just been visiting, people have just been saying, oh, it's at the floating rock, and it's kind of just become Keel's floating rock, I guess. Yeah. At the end of the session, I'll see if I can just share the presentation or something.
So did you have to build sort of foundations into the bottom of the pond? How is it like moored there?
Yeah, it's kind of, I worked with Ross Anchors to do the framework, and then Melly Manson to teach me how to do the fiberglassing of the actual rock. And Ross came up with this idea of sinking the wooden framework into the middle of the pool. So kind of, I guess, floated it out on blue barrels, a bit like a raft, and then pulled the barrels from the framework, so it just sank into the kind of correct position. So
okay.
The rock itself sits on a wooden framework, but it's at least quite, I guess, a simple piece of work when you look at it with just the rock above the water. But the framework and working out all that was, really challenging.
Was it hard to get like permission? Like, was it from the council or something? Who? It's
from Keele University, so no, it's quite easy. I think Ireland and Urban Wilderness did a great job, and because I come from I guess a bit of a tree surgeon background, I've actually done tree work there at Keele University as well, so I kind of know the grounds people there as well, so it was a bit more easier for me to kind of get permission, because I guess I had my foot in the door a little bit. Oh yeah. So that's the rock piece that I've been talking about is that piece, which was kind of respond the weight of things, was responding to I guess, a site, and it's a site-specific place, whereas all my other works, with the wooden structures that you can kind of see, were kind of made to, because I was kind of exploring the relationship between site-specific locations, sculpture, and the artist. And I was kind of interested in how one can't exist without the other, basically. So if there's not a performer, then the wooden constructions like the train wouldn't kind of work without the performer. And if it wasn't in the kind of the location where it was filmed, it wouldn't make sense to the actual design of the sculpture either. So the thing that you can see with change and me pulling, that's at Weston Park at the National Trust, where it was kind of responding to Capability Brown's landscape and Thomas Telford's journey to Weston Park and back via a carriage. And I'm kind of interested in, I guess, how man-made spaces in the Victorian sort of period, they're kind of quite labour intensive. Often people working who made them, I guess the Capability Brown landscapes, were getting paid peanuts. And it was really, really hard work, whereas I kind of, now they're really seen as the picturesque, I guess, picturesque spaces or places to visit. Whereas they've been created, I guess, from a labour of a love. And I think there's quite something quite interesting about kind of the romanticism and labour intensive roles, people who created them. I think there's something quite interesting about that.
So the breakout rooms are going to close soon. I think just a minute or a couple of seconds or so. So has anyone got any closing words or anything else that they'd like to ask at all? No. Well, it's been really good to hear some points from you, David. And
so if I put my camera off, you can see the guidelines, which I thought was the fastest thing to do. I'm Carola Boehm. I'm actually an academic at Staffordshire University, but I'm very much passionate about the things that we're actually talking about today. It's something that I've called in the past the co-production turn or culture 3.0. And I'm actually fascinated by the way we as a society are shifting into this new type of cultural engagement. And I think Stoke-on-Trent is at the forefront of this new type of cultural engagement, which is all about, not being able to differentiate between the audience and the artist, not really understanding when the art starts and when it stops. It's all about everyday creativity. So I'm absolutely delighted to have two artists who are going to speak to us today. Anna Francis, an artist and researcher who probably I don't have to introduce, whose practice aims to rethink city resources through participatory art interventions, and Daniella Beattie, a resident lighter who recently was involved in something that she has called pop-up drive-by art, the Lytton Trees. And I can't wait to hear about that. So I'm just going to hand over to Anna first, and then we're going to go to Daniella. And you are on mute.
Sorry. All my controls disappear once I open the PowerPoint. So let me know if you can see my slides.
Brilliant. Perfect.
Okay, lovely. So thanks so much, Carola. And really great to see you all here today for this discussion around the new rules of public art. Something which I have looked at in the past, actually, and which I know some of you will have looked at too when we were doing the Beneath the Pavement project back in 2015. And I see Dan Thompson here, who worked on that project with us here in Stoke-on-Trent, where a number of artists worked with us to kind of think about the role that we might have in public space. And actually this is something, when I look back at the work I've been doing really since 2005, although it takes lots of different shapes, really all of it comes back down to this question of what the role of artists are in places, and how we might intervene and inform development in some ways. So my work is always kind of looking at and questioning that. Just in this past week, I've been working with Rebecca Davies on a commission for Archifringe Scotland, which is a series of scenarios which commentate on planning and architectural processes in cities. And actually this is really informed by the many years of making work which really crosses into regeneration contexts, questioning, you know, our experience as humans, community members and artists. And I've curated quite a lot of shows around these questions and thoughts as well. And I really see the exhibition works, the curated works, as almost being the kind of theoretical space where I start to kind of really unpick some of the questions that occur when we as artists do make work in public space. And then there is the work which I'm going to talk about today, which is much more the intervention and where we as artists might kind of start to occupy space and think about space. So really there's a couple of threads within my practice which really kind of fit together. And it can be curatorial, but also it can be sort of about the intervention in public space. And I make much of that work with Airspace Gallery here in Stoke, but also as an independent artist, and then lately as part of the Portland In project, which I will talk about a bit later. But really, I wanted to start with this painting, and some of you will have kind of perhaps heard me talk about this painting before, because I wanted to bring this in because I do think it's very relevant to the role that I think public art takes. And especially this kind of expanded notion of public art, which we're speaking about today. This is Bruegel's landscape with the fall of Icarus, and it's described in Adam Chodzko's essay, Out of Place, which is a really fantastic, very short essay. And it's always stuck with me because this painting, I think it describes the way artists can work within the public sphere. I think that good work infiltrates and draws attention and communicates about place in a way which really changes forever how we think about the places that we occupy. So with this painting, it's a kind of ordinary sort of rural looking scene until you spot the flailing legs of Icarus down in the right hand corner. And once you've seen those legs, you can never not see them. So whenever you look at this painting, it's always sort of informed by and framed by those legs. And I think that really the work that we do as artists does that as well. And I think that good public art creates that experience for our participants, the people of a city or a place that we're working with. And, you know, even if it's a kind of very momentary experience that they might have, whenever they revisit that place, that experience will be there, and it lives with us. So I think that's quite important to kind of start with that. And I wanted to kind of just mention that because to some extent I really see my work as a spatial practice, a bit like this painting and these legs. And I wanted to mention Jane Rendell's sort of thoughts around spatial practices. In Rendell's work, critical spatial practices are those that question and transform the social conditions of the sites into which they intervene. And I see this work as very much situated within the framework of visual arts practice. I feel that one of the things we are taught from an early age within arts education is how to look. And much of the work that I do involves me spending time observing in order to understand actually what role we might take as artists. And I think how I look as an artist is important to point out as well, because in more recent years, I've really understood more about the processes I might use as a creative person to start to make sense of how I might be able to tackle something I notice as a gap in the world around me. And I now recognise that I use an action research process to start to make sense of the world, and importantly then to think about how I can intervene and perhaps try to change or make something better. But that this is an iterative process. So it starts with looking and then making a plan and then creating some kind of action and then a reflection, but then we go back around. And I think that that's the thing about the work that we do as artists and this kind of alternative approach to public art. It isn't about kind of creating something which is an answer to a question. It's a constantly questioning process that goes on and on and on. And so I feel that actually taking that long-term view is really key and important here. It isn't something which happens and then stops. And this has been the case with the work that I've been doing throughout my practice, really. Often the work does respond to gaps in the city, so that can mean becoming the tour guide in a city with no tour guide. So this was back in 2008. It might mean just noticing that there's a bandstand in the city that never has any bands on it, and then doing something about that by hosting concerts and asking questions about why we don't have anything happening on these spaces. And also perhaps situating myself as a commentator on sort of regeneration and the kind of processes of regeneration and how they kind of interact with us. So this was from a commission by Gemma Thomas, who now, of course, runs Appetite, where I set up a TV show in a disused shop in Stoke Town back in 2010. But I wanted to mention that a lot of the work is sort of very much situated in Stoke-on-Trent, but really it's about connecting that very localised work to sort of global concerns. And I'm really interested in going elsewhere to see, you know, how are artists interacting with their place around the world. And this was from a residency in a farmhouse in Japan, in Nara, back in 2012, where it was really fantastic to kind of visit the mountains there, where there are a lot of farms that are now empty, to see how artists are occupying those farms and making really amazing interventions, contributing to the rural life there. For example, helping with the rice harvest, because a lot of the young people have moved into cities and are no longer getting involved in farming, which is creating a big gap. So I'm sure you can see how I'm interested in those gaps, but always kind of looking elsewhere and then bringing that learning back to Stoke-on-Trent. So this was from I was learning Ikebana in Japan and brought that learning back to look at some of the brownfield sites that we have in Stoke-on-Trent, these opening up spaces, and then intervening there via a project which aimed to kind of rethink the resources of brownfields, bringing other artists and the public to kind of consider them and make some brownfield Ikebanas with me as a way of kind of thinking about value systems. So instead of Japanese beautiful vessels and flowers, I was using discarded materials and weeds. And these are some of the workshop participants, really fantastic brownfield Ikebana works. But I just wanted to kind of focus for a few minutes on this project, the Spode Rose Garden, because I think it does encapsulate all of that kind of thinking and working around, you know, how we might operate as artists and the role that we might take up. The Spode Rose Garden project began in 2013. It's the entrance into the British Ceramics Biennial since the two years before. At Airspace Gallery, we were questioning how the experience might be for sort of 30,000 visitors to the British Ceramics Biennial entering this fantastic, prestigious exhibition through a disused garden space. And so we started to think about, you know, how can we rethink this potential space, even with little resources. At the time in 2013, we couldn't renovate a whole garden because we didn't have the money or the access. So what we did was to mark out a triangle within that garden space and clean everything within the triangle, and, you know, paint even the bit of wall within the triangle, and create a planter there, and even cleaning the gravel and planting out that planter. And it was really obvious, the kind of demarcated triangle compared to everything else that was being left kind of to grow wild. We also worked with Rita Floyd, the ceramic flower maker, to make this beautiful ceramic rose, which we would use as an emblem for what the garden might become, but also a recognition of the fantastic ceramic skills in the city here in Stoke-on-Trent, some of which were being lost and still continue to be under threat. We took Rita Floyd's ceramic rose that she made us as this bone china emblem for the garden to Gareth Fryer, a flower breeder, and we asked him if he could breed us a rose like that. And we learned quite quickly that rose breeding doesn't work like that, and you can't kind of just put in a recipe that you want and get what you want back out. But we also learned what was really fantastic is that most rose breeders will have a big field full of trial plants, and he did actually have a rose T1036, which might potentially be what we were looking for. And we visited him in his wonderful Cheshire garden, field really, and saw this rose, which we then did a crowdfunder for. It had a really beautiful smell, and we wanted that to be our living emblem for the garden. We see the garden as a sort of living, breathing artwork, and the rose the kind of crowning glory within that. It was really important to involve other people. So thinking about long-term planning around an artwork like a garden, it's about how you involve other people as stakeholders and participants and users of that space. So we did a consultation back in 2015 during the BCB then about what people would want to see in the garden, and this led to us developing a garden plan very much based on the heritage patterns of Spode, which was what people wanted to see reflected. So willow pattern, of course, was really easy for us because there was a fantastic big willow tree, but also other patterns, historic patterns, would be included within that design. The bulk of the work happened in March 2016 as a result of some of those early interventions when the City Council, the landowner of that space, said, what's going on with this garden? Why are bits of it being left derelict and the rest being these triangles and being really renovated? And we said, well, it's your space and we will work with you to get some funding in. And we managed to get Pocket Park funds. And I think it's important to kind of think about that as our role as artists is to help perhaps others to see what is not being recognised as a resource or as a potential asset for a community or a place. And so even with the landowner, we were able to kind of say, this is your place, but this is not being used, and this is what it could look like. So taking other people on that imaginative journey with us and seeing what we're seeing. It launched in, I think it was 2017, alongside the Stoke Art Map event that we worked on with Akava Studios back then. And since then, we've been holding regular gardening days within the garden and hosting activity there each year. And it's now a thriving community space. It's used every day by people to eat their lunch, and we host usually around 4 public events a year, and we partner with, for example, the local nursery school often. We won an RHS Blooming Border in 2017, which I think for a group of amateur gardeners was really fantastic. And during the pandemic, it's been really difficult because obviously it's been really tough to be able to kind of gather, but we've been able to sort of rethink via a new programme, The Living Garden, which is all about sort of understanding this artwork, which is now, it's moved from that development stage. And I think it's important to kind of mention that when we're working with kind of longer term projects, you have this amazing momentum and energy when you're starting out, and a lot of people kind of imagining together and creating something and making change. There's all of that amazing creative energy. But then what happens to that long term? And when you kind of move from development stage and into the sort of sustainability stage, that energy is really difficult to sustain. And it's about kind of keeping that momentum and keeping the kind of imagination live. And so we're in that stage at this point, kind of thinking longer term, what resource will this garden be? And so that's kind of where we're at with that. I don't have time to talk about this project that I'm working on with artist Rebecca Davies and the people of Portland Street in Hanley. And anyway, I was asked to focus on the Rose Garden today. But I did want to just mention this project, which is about reimagining a disused and unloved building completely in line with the new rules of public art, as much of my work is. Because I do really agree with these points. It doesn't have to look like public art, and it's not forever. It's not about making something for a community, but creating a community, and all of those other fantastic points on there. For us, the building is an artwork created for and with the people of Portland Street, but it's not a fixed public artwork. It's a living and breathing entity, just like the Rose Garden. The new public art that I create evolves and it lives a life, and it goes through stages and phases. There is excitement and energy in the first stages of a project, the thinking through the problem, the working out how to intervene, the shared endeavour of creation. But this work that I make doesn't stop there. It's about longevity, sustainability, and being in something for the long haul. It sticks around even once the fanfare and fireworks have finished, and works together with the people of the place on what comes after the party, the tough bit where you figure out how something is going to survive. So I'm going to stop there, and I hope that kind of keys into some of the things that we're going to be talking about, and I'm looking forward to kind of opening those questions out with all of you.
Yeah. And we're going to hold on the questions a bit more, because we're going to hand over to Daniella, and then we're going to open it up for discussion after that.
Hello, I'm Daniella Beattie, and I'm a little bit of an outsider to this group, so I'm going to explain a little bit about why I'm here. My normal job, that's not to say that what this is isn't normal, but I work at the New Vic Theatre in Stoke-on-Trent, and I'm a lighting designer. So the bulk of my work is to provide lighting and atmosphere for theatre productions inside a building that people are already coming to because they want to come and see this art form. But it's a very collaborative process. I'm part of a big team of people. There can be up to 40 of us working on any production. And my design element is to take all of that lighting and to make that be a place on stage. But obviously with the pandemic last March, it stopped entirely with a great shuddering halt. To which we're now only just coming out of. The reason I'm sat in the rack room is because we are opening a show outside. So yeah, so the very salubrious black racks behind me are my backdrop. But last year, I was contacted by a company called Fuel Theatre, who had chosen 8 lighting designers across the country to find a local tree and to highlight the plight of the entertainment industry. And particularly with what I do, is there was no way we could do this anywhere outside really, because lighting design obviously is about lots of kit and being in the dark. But they were really interested in getting each of the designers to go and look into their local area and see if they could find somewhere that they wanted to put something in for their communities, from using their artistic skills that we've generated over the years of being indoors and making theatre, and take them out into the wild. So I was really excited about that, because as a project, I don't think I can ever think of an example where I've been said, here you are, it's all yours. I'm always part of a bigger collaborative where I'm trying to respond to a piece of set or a costume or an action that's happening. So to just go out and look for an object that I thought was interesting, beautiful, something that I could do, something that I thought would connect with people was a really liberating thing. And I thoroughly enjoyed it, because I don't get to do that very often. In fact, it's the first time, and I probably may never get to do it again. So I'm thoroughly enjoying it. So I'm going to start my presentation stuff to go in the background. I've kind of explained a bit of where I come from. Sorry, you've just disappeared slightly. So the Litten Tree was a project that was devised by Fuel to really accentuate what the industry has been going through, but also in how we could provide something that would make people feel differently about coming out of the dark. It was a very short time period that that we were given the project to do. I was contacted at the end of January, and they wanted the project to take place at the end of March. That's 8 weeks. So in my world of theatre, that's a very short turnaround time. But we are used to making things that are temporary structures, because that's all of our work. You work on a show for 6 months to a year, it goes on, it comes off again. So the temporary nature of it was quite exciting. So from, we had Glasgow, Banbury, Truro, Wales, London, and because I was kind of centrally located, being Leek in Staffordshire, I was to choose a tree in Leek. For COVID reasons, we needed to make it relatively close to us, so we weren't travelling to lots of places. And I looked around quite a few different trees, and I really liked the idea of that. I wanted to work on how we encounter a tree, in that when we go up to a tree, we don't view it from lots of different places most of the time. We view it from underneath it. We're in the branches, we're in that space between the canopy and the floor. So I was very much looking for a tree that gave me a big expanse underneath it. And there are 4 trees in the local park that I really like the look of, and they were an established oak, because they got that very children's drawing, like a lollipop, of a stem at the bottom and then a big bubble for the top of the tree. I was really interested in exploring that gap between the tree and the floor, because I thought that's where people will want to be within a tree, or where we look at a tree mostly. So I wanted to change the way people looked at that space in between there. So the other thing I was quite interested in is I'm working in theatre. I'm really about stories. I love stories. I get a new story every 4 weeks to work on. It's great. But it had to have something that kind of felt that it had a connection to a story in some way. And Leek is very well known for its textiles and fabric industry. So I was very much looking at the idea of threads and tapestries and weaving and all those kind of ideas. And so I was looking at ways in which I could put threads in between the branches and the ground. And also, while I was chatting to Isla from Urban Wilderness, we were talking about, and she said, oh, and of course there's the button industry in Leek. And I went, I didn't know anything about that. I've lived there 20 years. And so I went off and asked a couple of historians, and they were telling me all these really interesting things about the different kinds of buttons that were made in Leek. So do excuse my drawings. I am not an artist in that way. I play with light. So I started to draw things and put ideas together. And I was looking at how you might look at the tree in different ways and how that might be seen. So if you viewed it from above, you might see a shape that looks like a button. And if you viewed it from below, you would also see these crossed threads. One of the interesting things I discovered about the buttons was that there's a very specific one, which is this button here, which is called a Leek and Macclesfield Death's Head button, which I just thought was absolutely beautiful. So I started making a few. It's a wooden last and you wind a thread around it. So this pattern was really heavily informing the crisscross nature of the lights that I wanted to use in the tree. I'm quite a practical person because of the nature of my job. So I was really looking at how I could turn those thread designs into a light. So the product that we ended up using was one called a non-neon. I went through quite a few others, but that's the one we kind of settled on. And that really would allow me to crisscross and plait and weave those threads together to bring out this pattern. The button particularly was made by families in their homes as a piecemeal thing to then sell on. So they would then sell them on to the bigger manufacturers who would then sew them onto items. But I thought it was really interesting, particularly in the COVID world, that we've been so used to being locked in our houses or in small spaces. And this was something that people did back in the days when these buttons would have been made all the time. They were in their houses, they worked in their houses, they didn't necessarily leave them for an awful a lot of the time. So it felt like there was quite a nice connection between those two relevances for this project. They very much wanted us to do these and complete these in the last 3 days before the clocks went forward for a couple of reasons. There was the change in the COVID regulations that was allowing people to come outside in a few days after that, which made things different. We were, again, very cautious of the COVID regulations because we were aware that we were still being told for people not to gather, not in more than 6 people outside. So to then put in a piece of public art that people were going to want to come and see was quite a tricky thing. So the idea of the trees was that people would encounter them on their evening walk, on part of their daily exercise, that people weren't encouraged to necessarily stay, but they could see them, they could encounter them, and then they could move on with their evening. So we've been in lots of discussions, as with all these kind of projects, with the council, in the hope of getting to use the trees in the park, but they decided that they weren't prepared to take the risk that there may be a COVID outbreak because of people coming to see the tree. So I did have a plan B up my sleeve, which was at a local school, and that really was fantastic. This is the tree that we chose. It's not as mature as the ones I'd originally had the idea for, but I made sure that I could make it work underneath it. And they were just brilliant. They were so excited by the idea of having something pop up and bring art into their fields, and so they could talk about it with the children, and they've done projects with the children with it, and talking about the buttons and the industry. It was an absolute delight to work with them. It was really nice to feel that the idea of the project was being taken in the way it was. And we found that particularly with the layout of the area, we could discuss how we would manage it, and the school were very happy with those measures that we put in place. We used lots of things like on the posters that we put on the gates next to the tree, because we couldn't advertise it in social media in any way, because we couldn't be seen to bring people in from the outside area. So it was purely word of mouth. And we just had 2 little posters at the bottom where people could see the name of the project and the website and a QR code. So if they clicked on that, so if people came up to ask us, if we didn't want them to hang around for too long, we would say, pop onto there and have a look at that, and it tells you all about the project online and the other 7 trees that exist. So we finally got a tree with about 2 weeks to go on the project. So we managed to get all of the bits, and we started making. So the New Vic obviously was dark at that point, so they let me have the stage so I could wire everything together and make sure all the bits worked, and to get that into its ready and preparation stage for going into the tree itself. So because again it's an outdoors project, and with security and all the other things, we couldn't leave things up overnight. We had to take them down and put them back up again. It was one of those projects that we just had to make really compact. So each day we would fold it all up and drop it down again. And then there's just some footage here of us during the reset. You can see how close we were to the road, which actually worked brilliantly from the project in the end. It was interesting to hear what Ellie was saying about letting people encounter the art in their way, which was really good about where we were, because people could come up and could come and have a look at the project, or they could just stand back and take photographs. Or some people who I do know, a neighbour of mine suffered a stroke last year, and they were able to just come along and stop and watch from their car. So that really was great about the way that people could access it in a different manner. So the evening came, and it was really quite exciting the first night that we were able to accept the audience, and they came in and they came to talk to us about it. So I wasn't quite sure whether anyone was going to turn up at all, to be quite honest. It's a very medium-sized rural town, and although we have quite an active art scene, it's not necessarily the kind of place where people would go out to go specifically to go and see something like this. So when people started to come, and loads of people would come up and want to come and talk about the project, and even just to come and say, what's that? Why have you put it here? And to just be able to say, it's to give people some cheer and change their outlook and make them see something that's there every day and you'd never look at it, feel very different. So it was really great to have those lovely conversations, which I don't very often get to have about my work particularly. So it was really great to have those people come along. We had a little clicker that we had on the door. Over the 3 nights, we spoke to around about, we didn't speak to, but we saw people stopping, taking photos, driving past, or we spoke to around about 720 people, which was absolutely fantastic. The whole project with all of the trees saw 1,500 people, which is enough to fill the Adelphi in the West End for one night. So from the point of view of a public access piece of work, and none of these people were people who went out and went, I know this is on, I'm going to go and see it particularly. Although we did have some people who came all 3 nights. One of my favourite things was a lady who said she'd really love to come and bring her deck chair and just sit next to the tree, just to be in the presence of that object. Was really exciting. I must admit, I enjoyed being out for the whole 3 nights and just being out in the light, and I work with light a lot of the time, and I can see it and I can enjoy it, and just to be there was really great. The other part of the project was Fuel asked us to video and record all of the information so that they could produce a film in the long term, so that they can document all of the trees and put them together. So there is a film which I've seen a preview of. It's not quite out on the website yet, but that does have a picture of all of the trees, and it's really nice to see how they interact with the other communities, and also how very different each of the trees are. They, considering we're all lighting designers and we all work in the same industry, they all do a very different thing. But it was an absolutely fantastic project to be part of, and I was really glad to be able to go out and do something that other people could really enjoy and made them have a smile on their face.
Thank you so much.
Stop sharing there.
Thank you so much. We do have just 2 or 3 minutes left, and maybe the first question, what struck me about both presentations and thinking about the new rules of public art, you know, that both of those projects to me really go towards the second rule and the third rule. It's not forever, and don't make it for a community and create a community. But I did want to ask both Anna and Daniella, you know, were there favorites of the rules, you know, of public art that you, I guess in 2 minutes, were the favorite aspects of the public arts? And I can share the public arts as well, just to put them on the screen again. But do you have favorites?
I think definitely it's not forever. I think that's one of the most exciting things. I think particularly in the industry that I work in, it's very much about go now, do it now, and then remember it. And I think definitely to welcome outsiders, to bring them into what I'd brought into their space, and for them to come and talk about it, but also the idea that the majority of people who saw that are not the kind of people who would come and see what I would do on a daily or even yearly basis. So I think those were the 2 for me that sang out the most.
Nice.
I really like the, I mean, I think there's loads of space for kind of spectacle, but I do like the idea of demanding more than fireworks. And I think more and more as a result of COVID, I think we're seeing bigger institutions as well having to rethink the approach, which is often aligning value systems in the arts with audience and participant figures, and actually starting to kind of recognise a forced rethinking of the value systems, which actually smaller arts organisations and artists have been occupying for a long time, this kind of space of kind of individual and intimate encounter and sort of, I think that's going to get really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. We do have 1 minute left. Do some of the audience members have favorites in terms of the public rules, new rules for public art?
Thank you. So welcome back to our virtual space now. I was popping in and out of a couple of the breakout rooms, and the conversation was so interesting happening in there that I literally can't wait actually to hear all the playbacks. They've been recorded, so it'll give us a chance to hear everything that was happening in the rooms. If you had something that you thought was really interesting, or you just wanted to make a comment or ask a question that you didn't get a chance to in the breakout room, then do post that on Twitter now. We've still got Jenny furiously tapping away. So please keep the conversation going, keep any thoughts going. It's at urbanwilderness_CIC and #PublicArtNow. So we're now going to have a couple of minutes for each room. Aha, there they are. Got our wonderful hosts. Thank you so much, everybody. And we've just got about 2 minutes from each host to feedback on some of the points that they think were really interesting that were raised today. So we're going to start by calling on Charlotte Foster, who was in room number 1, Green Spaces. She was talking about public art in green spaces with Gabriella Gay and April Lin. Hi, Charlotte. Oh, I can't hear you.
I was on mute. No! I only did this professionally for a long time. So yeah, I felt like I was a bit, feels like I'm in Eurovision. I'm doing the judges' scores from London or somewhere. Exciting. We had a really good discussion talking about public art in green spaces, and there were 3 rules that really kind of struck people's imaginations and were talked about a lot. First one was, don't make it for a community, create a community. And we had some discussion about whether the word with is actually missing from that, and should it be created with a community. We talked about the collaboration side of things and how that creates communities and sustains communities, how they sustain themselves afterwards as well. And we also talked about how emails can be used as a gesture of care rather than just the emails that we bang out to each other as well, which I thought was really interesting. We looked at the demand more than fireworks rule, and Gabriella said about how it's about creating a spectacle versus creating awe, and the difference between those two as well. We talked around that a lot. But I think what the most interesting part, I say the most interesting, that's terrible. One of the really, really longest bits of discussion we had was about welcoming outsiders, and what happens if you, the artist, is the outsider. How do you react then? So, there was a lot of fears that you're going into a space that is not your natural space. There was a problem, how do you react if you're if you're scared? Is that down to your confidence as a person, confidence as an artist? What are people going to think of you? Are you going into their space where they walk their dog every day and you're doing some performative art, let's say, and people, do you have a right to do that? And of course you do, because they have the same right to walk their dog as you do to being there. But that was one of the really interesting things. It's like, you as the artist being the outsider, how do you allow yourself to be welcome in a space that you're not welcome, you don't normally go in, or it's not your sort of safe space as such. So that was some of the discussions we had, and it was really interesting.
That's really interesting. And I think, I wonder, I don't know if we've got time to elaborate on it now, but I wonder whether any of the artists had any techniques they used with that, because part of this symposium is about, we're working with 5 artists who haven't potentially worked in spaces before. We're going to ask them to create artworks outdoors in spaces, and these are all the issues which I think are going to be really relevant for them. So I don't know whether April or Gabby had any special advice.
A lot of it was around accepting the fear and accepting your space and accepting you are allowed there, but also having some safety measures in place as well, obviously. If there was a moment, that you're not quite happy with, but it's a lot about confidence within yourself and allowing yourself to be somewhere. So it's about making sure that you do welcome yourself into a space that you wouldn't normally be in, especially in a green space as well. I think that's particularly, we all have, I noticed last year in lockdown, I had my little spaces that I really enjoyed going to before lockdown, and then everyone else came into those spaces because we're all doing our daily walks, and I felt invaded a little bit. And I had to go, no, these people are allowed in these spaces as much as I'm allowed in these spaces. And I think there was a lot of that sort of feeling going around as well.
That's brilliant. Okay, that's really, really helpful. Thank you, Charlotte. So from our next room, room number 2, Nicola Winstanley was the host there, and she was talking about streetscapes with Joyce Iwaszko. Would you mind sharing back some of the thoughts from your room?
Yeah, absolutely. We had a really great discussion about every other seat and work that Dust Rising had done in Piccadilly and in Newcastle-under-Lyme, and that inspired some really interesting conversation about two of the provocations particularly. The first of which was embellish, don't embellish, interrupt. We had quite an interesting discussion where some of us were saying that we support that's a good rule to follow, but then there was a lot of discussion about could it be both? Could it be embellishment and interruption? And we heard from Anne and Joyce about their experiences of embellishing in streetscapes that are dilapidated and sort of fractured socially, the idea of embellishing there seems to me is an interruption in itself. And like Charlotte was just saying, it's almost a gesture of care to embellish in a space that way. And they talked about how that helped to make people stop and ask questions more and talk more about what was going on in their environment, in a more friendly environment. So that was really interesting part of the discussion. And then we had a chat about the first one, It's Not Forever, talking about permanence and impermanence, and the difference between how people relate to those two things. One of the interesting things that Lisa said to us was that for more temporary pieces of public art in streetscapes, it's a more inclusive way of including artists that aren't necessarily professional yet or haven't got that much experience, allows artists to experiment in streetscapes rather than having to always jump to high capital municipal projects, which exclude a lot of artists that are developing these more liminal practices. I thought that was a really great point. And it also helps to encourage partnership between small organisations and large arts organisations as well. And that's something that was spoken about in our room. That's something that needs to happen more, needs to be allowed to happen more. We also had really interesting discussion from I think it was Ellison that was talking about a project that she'd done in Derby, which was a capital funded project. And they wanted to make something that was impermanent, but had to do something more permanent for the amount of money that the money that they had to spend. And so they put their permanent piece of public art in a place where it would become changing and impermanent by putting it on the edge of the Derwent River, so that it would become silted up and it would disappear over time. So I think that's really interesting to consider, permanence and impermanence. I spoke briefly about the Edward Colston statue and how that was seen as a permanent piece of sculpture that had been there for a very long time and had become irrelevant in the streetscape until it became very relevant and people began to interact with it and created a happening around that permanent piece of sculpture, which then became impermanent. So it's a really, really interesting discussion in that room about streetscapes and the way that people engage with art in them.
That's amazing. Yeah, that is so interesting, isn't it? I like the way, it's always, I don't know, you think things are binary, but they're not, are they? So, yeah, the idea of permanence and impermanence and how that's interpreted, and that idea as well of embellishment, like that being an interruption in itself. I think as well, that point about the money, isn't it? Sometimes we sort of think, God, if only I had so much money, I could do something amazing. But then the stifling impact and the pressure of that finance and the fact that actually that finance is going to go into capital rather than time, and maybe by allowing smaller projects to happen, we can animate spaces much more broadly, bring in more artists, which I think we're seeing as like this would be great. The more artists we can bring into public spaces, the more we can animate them. Thank you, Nicola. So next, I would like to call on Cynthia Coady, who has been in room 3 talking about installations, which segues nicely from the talk about the Colston statue there, with David Bethell and Anna Berry. So hi, Cynthia. Oh, I can't hear you.
Hi, I realised. How are you guys?
We're doing really good. It's really good to see you. Do you want to let us know any of the interesting things that people have been saying?
Yes, of course. So whilst in that group meeting, I found the point about it's not forever started a lot of conversation, kind of talking about time, how long installations should last. And somebody made a really good point of saying about decomposition and how that would take time if that was an installation within itself. So yeah, we spoke about how things should be in terms of installations and how immersed they can be when time is taken into consideration. And I also think we also spoke about the cultural arms race and what that was. Somebody read as a definition just so we could get a better understanding. And we realised that it was trying to kind of encourage individuality with the installations that you make. And that also kind of fitted in with creating a space for the unplanned, which was nice to see that people were connecting the rules in place and kind of seeing how they all feed into each other. Yeah, it's a really, really good conversation. I think also as well, I also mentioned don't waste time on definitions, just to kind of see if people did get stuck with defining their art to their audience. And it was interesting to hear like David Bethell's interpretation of his process, and along with Anne as well, and just seeing that they're two artists with two different perspectives on art.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really great to hear. And I think, yeah, that raises lots of interesting questions. I think one of the rooms I popped into, they were talking about don't waste time on definitions. And I think particularly, like so many artists now would describe themselves as multidisciplinary, or, you know, we move freely between what media, especially if you're working in public spaces, then and working with community, a lot of it is reactive, isn't it, to the context of your work. So how relevant is it to define yourself, put yourself into a box? Thank you, Cynthia. That was great. See you later.
See you.
And then we move on to our final room, which was hosted by Carola Boehm. And she was talking about hyperlocal spaces with Anna Francis and Daniella Beattie. Hi, Carola. Would you share some of the thoughts from your room with us?
Yes, we heard about two absolutely fascinating projects, the Bespoke Rose Garden and the Litten Trees, and we were so amazed that we probably didn't manage to get a lot of discussions in, but the fascination of those two projects, which in some ways were so different and in some ways had really common themes of connectivity, how these projects could connect with the communities, but also the meaning of the places, the historical signifiers, the heritage items that attach themselves to places and to communities. And both projects allowed, through that process of creation, but also through then the process of engaging with an audience, to have these connectivities to the place and to the histories and to the meanings to really come to the fore. So that was really, really great to see. We had a really, really short time in terms of discussion in relation to the rules of public art. And of course, you know, out jumps this notion of it doesn't have to look like public art. It's not forever, don't make it for a community, create a community, but also this notion of demand more than fireworks, which of course comes back, you know, as almost like a political message of that we now come into a time where we have a different kind of cultural engagement. One that comes back to, you know, when you started off, you know, do we do public art? And there's a preconception of what public art is, but we collectively, and I always would suggest we lead in Stoke-on-Trent on that journey. We are shifting the way we can actually engage and understand what art in the public sphere can actually work with, co-create with the communities and the heritage signifiers, the meanings that all, you know, that make a place as such. So that's in a nutshell.
Wow, you are wonderful at summarising things. Thank you, Carola. And thank you as well for relating it back to Stoke-on-Trent. I mean, with your role as Create Place, I know that you are sort of spearheading, you know, or trying to raise the profile of Stoke-on-Trent for what we do really well here, which is that collaboration, that co-creation, the care that all the artists take about that relationship, and also the care about the places that we work in. So
absolutely.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So it's the end, coming towards the end. It's gone quite quickly in some ways, but it feels like we've packed so much into it. It's going to take a while to mull over lots of things, but I'd just like to sum up by saying massive thank you to our hosts, Charlotte Foster, Carola Boehm, Nick Winstanley and Cynthia Coady. Thank you very much for joining us today and being such great facilitators. And I would also like to say thank you very much to Pete Herbert and the team at King Street Studios who have produced this amazing quality event for us, and which we will be, we've recorded the breakout rooms, so we will be going back through the footage and editing it together so that we can have a video which will be available online for anyone to watch back. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So thanks again to all of our speakers, all of our artists who have shared their work. So that was Anna Berry, Ellie Harris, Gabriella Gay, and then in the breakout rooms you had Anna Francis, Daniella Beattie, April Lin. I'm going to forget someone.
David Bethell,
Joyce Iwaszko. And I think that's it.
Yep.
So massive thanks to everybody. And just a reminder, as Laura said, that we've been recording this conversation today, so it will be available. Carry on talking on Twitter, carry on using the hashtag #PublicArtNow. We will be emailing everybody who attended today to see if, to get some feedback and to see if there's any interest in carrying on the conversation. And of course, just to wrap up by saying thank you to our funders. This is part of our Wastelands Public Art Now programme, which is funded by the Arts Council England and Canal and Rivers Trust, and Urban Wilderness is also funded by the National Lottery Community Fund. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us today. Bye.